Chapter 1355. Second Grandpa was stunned. He smiled and said, Feiyang didn't attack Elder Qin, which means that he hasn't lost his mind. It also means that he hasn't really let it go. He was just angry when he said that he didn't care. Angry words? I don't think so. You didn't see how he looked at that time. Even I was shocked. He didn't seem to be joking at all. Lu Jing shook his head and said. Second Grandpa smiled and didn't say anything more. He asked, Then why did you come back this time? Lu Jing said, I want to see the Emperor's whereabouts again. You already said that Feiyang doesn't care anymore. Is there still a need for that? We'll talk about it later. So what if we find the Emperor? Kill him? I think Feiyang hasn't figured out how to resolve his grudges with the Emperor yet. Second Grandpa said with a smile. I know that. But the Emperor's behavior this time is too strange. I think it's better to investigate thoroughly in case of any accidents. Lu Jing said. Kid, you've been with Feiyang for a while. How did you become as suspicious as him? Second Grandpa was speechless. You don't say. Although he's my little cousin, I've learned a lot from him during this period of time. Lu Jing chuckled. Then tell me, what have you learned? Second Grandpa was curious. Lu Jing's face darkened and he said, Don't change the topic. We're not talking about this now. Second Grandpa smiled helplessly, got up and said, Okay, I'll go and take a look again. Take me with you. I've long wanted to see that mysterious divine object. Lu Jing immediately went up and grabbed Second Grandpa's arm, chuckling. No. This is a secret of our clan. In the world, no one knows about it except for the elders of our clan. Second Grandpa shook his head. Lu Jing asked, Then do Uncle Black and my brother know about it? Of course they know. After all, they are the pillars of our clan. Second Grandpa said. What do you mean? Lu Jing was immediately annoyed and said, Do you mean that I'm not a pillar of the clan? Second Grandpa said, I don't know about the future, but at least not now. I'm heartbroken. Lu Jing snorted. Second Grandpa glanced at him, then looked at Lu Jing's hand, which was tightly gripping his arm, and said, Since you're sad, why don't you let go? I just won't let go. If you can be so ruthless, then chop off my hand. Lu Jing snorted and turned his head away, looking like a rascal. Second Grandpa felt helpless and said, All right. Since you've already broken through to the Combat Emperor realm, it's good to let you experience it. Thank you, Second Grandpa. I love you the most. Lu Jing was overjoyed. He even wanted to kiss the old man's face a few times. The speed at which he changed his attitude was faster than flipping a book. Second Grandpa shook his head helplessly. With a wave of his palm leaf fan, the two of them appeared in a secret passage. Where is this? Lu Jing looked around in surprise. Under the ground of our village. As Second Grandpa spoke, he walked towards the end of the tunnel. Fuck. After living here for so many years, I still don't know that there's a secret passage under the village. Lu Jing was dumbfounded. Then he quickly chased after Second Grandpa. There are still many things that you don't know. Second Grandpa smiled faintly. Yes. That genius brother of mine knows everything, but I'm like a blank piece of paper. This is the difference in treatment. I'm just wondering why I was born in the Lu family. How unlucky. Lu Jing complained unhappily. When Second Grandpa heard this, the veins on his forehead bulged. He flicked Lu Jing's head with the back of his hand. Lu Jing grimaced in pain, looking aggrieved. Is it because I haven't hit you in so long that your skin is itching for a beating? Second Grandpa glared at him and continued walking forward. Biased. Lu Jing groaned. His face was full of displeasure. After walking for a while, flames suddenly appeared in front of them. Lu Jing looked at the light curiously and forgot about the pain in his head. He couldn't help but quicken his pace. Soon he saw that the light came from a grotto. This is it. Second Grandpa stopped in front of the grotto and pointed down. Lu Jing looked down. The grotto was round and bottomless. Its diameter was more than 100 feet. It was like a dark bottomless pit, exuding a mysterious aura. In the middle of the grotto, dozens of meters below, there was a fiery red mirror floating in the air. The mirror was oval in shape and was the size of two grown men's palms. It flickered with divine light, making the grotto as bright as day. The frame of the mirror was made of a kind of crimson divine iron. 2 fire phoenixes were carved on it. The power of a divine beast could be felt from afar. What's that? Lu Zheng was surprised. The sky mirror. Second Grandpa looked at the divine mirror. His eyes, which had always been calm and tranquil, were now filled with dazzling divine light. The sky mirror? Lu Zheng was slightly taken aback. He murmured, "The name sounds quite impressive. I wonder if it's really that powerful?" Second Grandpa snorted. The sky mirror can see through the laws of heaven and earth and peek at the source of all things. It is the most precious treasure in the world. Its power is not something a young boy like you can imagine. Really? Lu Zheng was in disbelief. Nonsense. Do I look like a liar? Second Grandpa looked at him angrily. Lu Zheng smiled. Phew. Second Grandpa let out a long breath and calmed down. He said, "Please come out of seclusion and revive the sky mirror again." His voice reached the bottom of the grotto, echoing deafeningly. There are people down there?" Lu Zheng was surprised. "Second Grandpa, we just revived the sky mirror not long ago. Now you want us to revive it again. Are you going to kill us?" A dissatisfied voice sounded from below the grotto. Then, 10 figures rushed up and landed beside the sky mirror. These 10 people were old and young, male and female, but they did not have any aura. If they were not standing in the void, one would think that they were mortals. Ah. Lu Zheng looked at the 10 people in surprise and said, "Second Grandpa, who are they? Why do they all look so unfamiliar? Are they the old monsters of our Lu family who have died?" Old monsters? The 10 people were stunned. They turned to look at Lu Zheng. Their faces were dark, and the veins on their foreheads were bulging. Second Grandpa was also amused. One had to know. Even he did not dare to be too presumptuous with these 10 people in front of him. But this little bastard actually called them old monsters in front of these people? Newborn calves are really not afraid of tigers. Bang! There was no suspense. Lu Zheng was hit again and cried out in pain. Second Grandpa said with a dark face, "What old monsters? Don't you have any manners? Call him ancestor." "They are indeed those old monsters. I thought they were all dead. It turns out that they are all alive and well." Lu Zheng pursed his lips, looked at the 10 people and bowed. "Greetings, ancestor." Only then did the 10 people's expressions ease up. But suddenly, Lu Zheng rushed in front of them, licked his face and said with a smile, "Ancestor, this is the first time we meet. Do you have any greeting gifts? I am not greedy. 7 or 8 divine artifacts will be enough." The 10 people's faces also darkened. How could the Lu family have such a descendant? 7 or 8 divine artifacts. How dare he say that? A white-haired old man, the corner of his mouth twitched violently, looked up at Second Grandpa, and said, "Second Grandpa, is he the little guy called Lu Zheng that you often talk about?" "That's him." Second Grandpa coughed and nodded. "That's not right. Didn't you say that this kid is very sensible? Why does it look like that now?" The old man in white frowned. Ahem. Maybe he was too excited to see you and couldn't control himself," Second Grandpa said, looking very unnatural. "Is that so?" The old man in white looked at him playfully. Second Grandpa felt more and more guilty. He hurriedly changed the topic and said, "Let's hurry up and activate the Taoist mirror to find the whereabouts of the emperor." The old man in white looked at Second Grandpa meaningfully, waved his old hand gently, and Lu Zheng immediately flew toward Second Grandpa uncontrollably. "Let's begin." The old man in white looked at the other 9 people. Everyone nodded and immediately spread out, forming a circle around the Taoist mirror. Then, the 10 people looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Boom! 10 terrifying divine auras immediately rushed out of the 10 people's bodies. Then, the 10 people raised their arms and pointed their index fingers at the Taoist mirror. The power of the fake gods suddenly emerged from their fingertips and rushed toward the Taoist mirror like a tide. Damn, there are 10 fake gods. I always thought that the Lu family only has a few fake gods on the surface. Sensing the amazing divine aura, Lu Zheng was stunned. Second Grandpa said in a low voice, I just said that there are a lot of things about the Lu family that you don't know. Lu Zheng glanced at second grandpa and suddenly smiled mischievously. Second grandpa, is what the old man said true? Second grandpa was a little annoyed and said expressionlessly, "What do you mean true? I don't understand." "Stop pretending. That old man clearly said that you said that I was very sensible in front of them. Second grandpa, in fact, you still feel sorry for me in your heart, right?" Lu Zheng laughed. "Yes. I do feel sorry for you, but who told you to be so disappointing? Do you know why I said that to them?" Second grandpa said angrily. "Why?" Lu Zheng was curious. "Because they have the divine arts in their hands. This old man is saying this to leave a good impression on you in their hearts. But you revealed your true nature as soon as you saw them, and even called them old monsters. You're really bold. Now, I'm afraid that they are very disappointed in you." Second grandpa looked at him as if he had expected better from him. "Oh, why didn't you say such a good thing earlier?" When Lu Zheng heard this, it was too late for regrets. Second grandpa rolled his eyes and said, "Your eldest brother is not like you. When he first came to meet them, he was very mature and steady. At that time they gave him a divine art." Obviously, second grandpa was deliberately provoking him. "Oh my God! My divine art!" When Lu Zheng heard that, his intestines turned green with regret, and he cried out in sorrow. Second grandpa gloated and said to himself, "But don't be sad. They are not unreasonable people. As long as you perform well in the future, you will have a chance." "Really?" Lu Zheng was surprised and doubtful. "Yes." Second grandpa nodded. "Okay. I will perform well and strive to get the divine art." Lu Zheng clenched his hands and nodded heavily. What a joke. Who didn't want a divine art? For the divine art, not to mention performing well, even if he had to carry the shoes of those 10 old monsters, it didn't matter. Chapter 1356. Buzz. The Taoist mirror kept buzzing, and the divine light became more and more dazzling. The 2 fire phoenixes on the mirror frame also seemed to come alive. They circled around the Taoist mirror, flying and emitting divine power. "Amazing!" Lu Zheng muttered. He looked at the 10 people again, and a touch of surprise appeared in his eyes. He discovered that there were bean-sized beads of sweat on the 10 people's foreheads. Even his face was faintly pale. What's going on? Lu Zheng looked at the 10 people in confusion. One had to know that these were 10 false gods. 10 false gods working together were still so difficult? He swallowed and asked in a low voice, "Second grandpa, what level is this Taoist mirror?" "I don't know either. However, at least 10 false gods are needed to revive the Taoist mirror." Second grandpa said to himself. "What? At least 10 false gods?" Lu Zheng was stunned, and his breathing became rapid. He muttered, "So it's much more powerful than Mu Qing's all-seeing eye?" "They can't be compared. The all-seeing eye is a fighting soul. Its power will continue to increase as its owner's cultivation level increases." Second grandpa said. Lu Zheng said in surprise, "You mean Mu Qing's all-seeing eye will surpass the Taoist mirror sooner or later?" "That's inevitable." Second grandpa nodded. Lu Zheng was speechless. He said, "It seems that we have to find a chance to get rid of this person. If there's a chance, it's best to get rid of him. Otherwise, this person will become our biggest enemy in the future. However, it won't be easy for him to surpass the Taoist mirror. Because according to my research, the Taoist mirror should be a divine artifact of the same level as Changshui and the castle. Of course, this is just my guess. Maybe Changshui and the castle are of a higher level than the Taoist mirror." Second grandpa laughed secretly. "Wait. Are you sure that the Taoist mirror is of the same level as Changshui?" Lu Zheng frowned. "Why do you ask?" Second grandpa was suspicious. "Last time in Wang Yangfeng's village, in order to kill the state preceptor, my younger cousin lent Changshui to Ren Duxing. At that time, Ren Duxing revived Changshui with just a wisp of his divine consciousness. But now the sky-stealing mirror needs 10 fake gods to be revived. Why does it seem like Changshui's level is lower than the sky-stealing mirror?" Lu Zheng was doubtful. "Are you sure that Ren Duxing has fully recovered?" Second grandpa chuckled. "What do you mean?" Lu Zheng was stunned. Chang Shui is not as simple as you think. When Ren Duxing revived Chang Shui, he probably didn't even have 1/10 of its power. Although this old man doesn't know exactly how strong Chang Shui is, this old man can determine that if he fully recovers, he should be able to destroy half of the Great Qin Empire, or perhaps even stronger. Second Grandpa said. What? Lu Zheng was dumbfounded and asked, can't the sky-stealing mirror do the same? No. Although the sky-stealing mirror can spy on everything, it's not very lethal. It's considered an auxiliary divine object. Of course, it's not without any lethality. Second Grandpa said. I see. Lu Zheng looked at the sky-stealing mirror. Although it was only an auxiliary divine object, it was an invincible existence in today's world. If he could get it, thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel excited. Don't blame this old man for not telling you in advance. The sky-stealing mirror is the most precious treasure of the Lu family. If you dare to do anything to it. Second Grandpa smiled coldly, pointed at the 10 people, and said, they will let you taste despair. How dare I? Lu Zheng smiled embarrassedly. Boom. Before he finished speaking, a mighty aura rushed out of the sky-stealing mirror. There seemed to be images flashing on the transparent mirror, but they were very blurry and couldn't be seen clearly. How could this be? The 10 people looked at the sky-stealing mirror, their faces full of shock. Second Grandpa also took a step forward and landed beside the old man in white. He said in a deep voice, the sky-stealing mirror has never had such a situation before. Could it be? That's right. The Emperor must have used the divine order left by the previous Emperor. The old man in white said. Is he crazy? For 10,000 years, no emperor has used the divine order because they all know that the divine order is the last life-saving talisman of the Great Qin Empire. Has he never thought about how to protect the Great Qin Empire when it faces a disaster in the future? Second Grandpa was furious. The old man in white looked at Second Grandpa and sighed. Our current emperor is a little selfish. The others also frowned. Lu Zheng noticed that the atmosphere was not right. He looked at the sky-stealing mirror and flew to Second Grandpa's side. He frowned and said, Second Grandpa, what's going on? It's a long story. In short, whether it's the sky-stealing mirror or the all-seeing eye, they can't find the emperor anymore. Second Grandpa said helplessly. This, Lu Zheng's face stiffened. Second Grandpa said, go and tell Feiyang not to force himself too much. Follow his heart. Okay. Lu Zheng nodded. Bright Sky Palace. After Lu Zheng returned, he conveyed Second Grandpa's words to Qin Feiyang without missing a word. But he didn't say a word about the sky-stealing mirror. He only said that no one could find the emperor now. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while. Then he ignored the outside world and continued to copy the Xing character formula. Lu Zheng glanced at Qin Feiyang, and then scanned the castle. Now, in the castle, in addition to Wang Yangfeng, the seal, and the thunder leopard, there was also the fire qilin. Ever since they rescued the fire qilin from the Mu family, it had been recovering. 10 days in the castle was 1 day outside. It was almost fully recovered now. A divine beast. Unfortunately, it's not what my Lu family wants. My Lu family only wants the divine beast fire phoenix. Lu Zheng looked at the fire qilin and muttered to himself. He also sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes to meditate. In the ancient tower, the construction of the herb field was finally completed. Lu Hong, Dan Wangkai, Viper, Ren Wushuang Seahorse, and the others all came to the castle and continued to cultivate. As for the follow-up management of the herb field, Qin Feiyang handed it over to Old Master, Luo Qianxue, Yin Nanshan and Lu Ji. Of course, this was proposed by the 4 of them, because they wanted to share some of the burden with Qin Feiyang. The construction of the Sky Tiger tribe was also nearing completion. It was worth mentioning that Wang Xiaojie and Mu Chen also fought with the beasts in the ancient tower all day long. Whether it was their temperament or courage, they were slowly changing. Especially Wang Xiaojie. In order to enter the castle to cultivate as soon as possible, he was putting his life on the line. Time passed day by day just like that. Outside, 15 days had passed. Inside the ancient castle, a total of 150 days had passed. It was equivalent to 5 months. Boom. Early in the morning, Qin Feiyang finally completed the second stroke of the movement character formula. His cultivation soared to a 3-star combat emperor. According to the time in the outside world, the second stroke took 5 days more than the first stroke. It seems that the later strokes, the longer the time needed. Fortunately, the rules of time in the castle have changed. Otherwise, I don't know how long it would take for me to complete all the strokes of the movement character formula. Qin Feiyang muttered. He calmed his heart, restrained his aura, and continued to copy the third stroke. Lu Zheng was awakened by Qin Feiyang's aura. Seeing that Qin Feiyang had no intention of asking about the situation outside, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart and continued to cultivate. And these days passed. Not only Qin Feiyang, everyone's cultivation had improved. Especially White-Eyed Wolf. Other than building the herb field, he had always been in seclusion cultivation. In addition, his talent was better than everyone else's. His current cultivation had already reached the level of a 2-star combat emperor. Anyway, its plan was to catch up to Qin Feiyang no matter what. Although he didn't have the purple gold dragon blood, and his speed wasn't as fast as Qin Feiyang's, he had more time than Qin Feiyang. Because he didn't need to care about the outside world. He only needed to cultivate. In the blink of an eye, outside another 10 days had passed. In addition to the previous 15 days, a total of 25 days had passed since the emperor went missing. Although 25 days had passed, everything in the imperial palace was normal. There were no disturbances in the imperial capital, because, whether it was the imperial tutor or old man Qin, they were both deliberately blocking the news of the emperor's disappearance. As for Lu Xingqian, he unexpectedly remained silent. However, although the imperial capital looked calm on the surface, the competition between old man Qin and the imperial tutor had never stopped. The imperial tutor tried his best to monopolize the power. Old man Qin tried his best to stop him. But in comparison, old man Qin wasn't as good as the imperial tutor, because the imperial tutor had the entire law enforcement palace behind him, as well as the Zhuge family and the current Empress Dowager. Moreover, the invincible Black Army was also basically under the imperial tutor's control. Old Qin, on the other hand, was alone. As for the commander of the Kirin army, neither side dared to offend him, so they had always had an attitude of not helping each other. Without anyone's help, how could old man Qin fight against the imperial tutor with his own strength? He was now in a terrible fix. During this period, he also went to the Bright Heaven Palace to look for Qin Feiyang several times. Because now, only Qin Feiyang could keep the imperial tutor in check. But every time, he returned empty-handed. Not to mention seeing Qin Feiyang, he didn't even hear Qin Feiyang's voice. What should I do? Every night, old man Qin stood alone in the sky above the pagoda, frowning and sighing. Although he knew that the emperor wasn't dead, for some reason he didn't dare to say it. On the morning of the 26th day of Qin Feiyang's seclusion, early in the morning, outside the Golden Imperial Palace, hundreds of people came one after another. They were the civil and military officials of the Great Qin Empire. The various marquises were also there. They gathered outside the Golden Imperial Palace, whispering and discussing in low voices, and most of them were questioning voices. The head eunuch walked out of the Golden Imperial Palace and asked suspiciously, "Why are you all here?" Head eunuch: "Last time, you said that His Majesty was unwell and let us handle the matters at hand, but now it's been almost a month. Why hasn't His Majesty come to court yet? Where is His Majesty feeling unwell? Can you let us see His Majesty?" The civil and military officials spoke one after another. No matter what, as time passed, it would definitely arouse suspicion. "I'm afraid that won't do." The head eunuch shook his head. He looked calm on the surface, but he couldn't help but panic in his heart. Paper can't wrap fire, this was a famous saying. Chapter 1357. Why not? His Majesty hasn't appeared for so long. We care about him and just want to meet him. Steward, tell us honestly, is there something you're hiding from us? Hearing the words of the head eunuch, the civil and military officials were enraged. His tone also became aggressive. Seeing this, the head eunuch became more and more flustered. not knowing how to deal with it. We must see His Majesty today. Yes, if we don't see His Majesty, we will stand here and not leave, a portion of the people said angrily. They were all old officials of the Great Qin Empire. Although their status in the Great Qin Empire was not comparable to the various marquises, they were still loyal to the emperor. Everyone, it is His Majesty's order to not see everyone. Why make things difficult for the steward? Suddenly, a faint laughter rang out, and Zhuge Wuhou appeared out of thin air in front of the throne room. Seeing Zhuge Wuhou's arrival, the head eunuch seemed to have grabbed onto a life-saving straw. He ran in front of Zhuge Wuhou and said in a low voice, "These people are already suspicious. Quickly help me deal with them." Zhuge Wuhou secretly said, "Don't worry, I came here to help you deal with them." The head eunuch heaved a sigh of relief. "Zhuge Wuhou, His Majesty hasn't attended the morning court for so many days. Aren't you worried at all?" Someone looked at Zhuge Wuhou and said. This person was also a marquis. His name was Xiao Wuhou, but his strength was much weaker than Zhuge Wuhou. Zhuge Wuhou looked at Xiao Wuhou, and a cold light flashed in his old eyes. He sighed. "This marquis is naturally worried," Xiao Wuhou said. "Then why are you still speaking up for the steward?" "I just said that it was His Majesty's order to not see everyone. What's the use of making things difficult for the steward?" Zhuge Wuhou said. Xiao Wuhou said, "We are not making things difficult for the steward. We just want to see His Majesty with our own eyes and confirm His Majesty's safety." Zhuge Wuhou's face immediately darkened as he said angrily, "Xiao Wuhou, what do you mean by that? Could it be that there is someone in the imperial palace who dares to plot against His Majesty?" Xiao Wuhou's expression changed and he hurriedly said, "That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean?" Zhuge Wuhou's eyes darkened. Seeing that Zhuge Wuhou's aura was becoming more and more oppressive, Xiao Wuhou's eyes were also filled with anger as he said, "What? Is it wrong for me to be concerned about His Majesty?" "That's right. But please don't talk nonsense. It will cause panic. After all, you are also a martial marquis. Don't be so reckless, lest others misunderstand that you, Marquis Xiao, have ulterior motives," Zhuge Wuhou said. "Ulterior motives? This marquis only wanted to see His Majesty. Yet you're obstructing me in every way possible. If there's anyone with ulterior motives, it's you," Marquis Xiao shouted. "Marquis Xiao, please pay attention to your words." Zhuge Wuhou was furious. Just as the two of them were about to explode in anger, a figure descended from the sky above the throne room. He was wearing a dragon robe and a dragon crown on his head. His entire body was exuding an extremely majestic aura. Who else could it be but the emperor? "Your Majesty!" The head eunuch was overjoyed. He quickly flew to the front of the emperor and bowed. "Your Majesty!" "Greetings, Your Majesty!" The officials below also knelt and kowtowed, including Marquis Zhuge. However, in Marquis Zhuge's heart, he was extremely bewildered. Wasn't the emperor already killed? Why did he suddenly come back? And from the looks of it, there was no trace of injury. "All of you rise." The emperor swept his gaze across the crowd of officials, and an inexplicable light flashed in his eyes. He then entered the throne room and sat on the dragon throne right above. The civil and military officials also entered the throne room one after another, neatly lining up on both sides of the hall below. "Your Majesty, I heard that you were unwell. Are you better now?" Marquis Xiao took a step forward and asked with concern. "I'm fine now. Thank you for your concern, Marquis Xiao," the emperor said with a faint smile. Marquis Xiao heaved a sigh of relief and said respectfully, "Your Majesty's words are too serious. Caring for Your Majesty is your subjects' duty and responsibility." The emperor nodded and waved his hand. Marquis Xiao bowed and consciously retreated to his original position. Another minister walked out from the crowd and stood in the middle of the hall. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, there have been a lot of official matters piled up these days." This old minister. But before he could finish, the emperor waved his hand and said, "We'll talk about official matters later. Leave first, I have something to announce." "Yes." The minister was slightly taken aback, respectfully responded, and then retreated into the crowd. The emperor glanced at the civil and military officials. The civil and military officials also looked at the emperor suspiciously. For a moment, the throne room fell into a dead silence. A moment later, the emperor finally broke the silence and said with a smile, "The matter that I want to announce is a great thing for my great Qin Empire." "What good thing?" Marquis Zhuge's eyes flashed as he asked with a smile. The emperor said, "I have already comprehended the profound meaning of becoming a god." "What?" Marquis Zhuge was shocked. The others were stunned for a moment, and then they were all overjoyed. The emperor smiled and said, "However, I have just entered the threshold and still need to comprehend it. Therefore, I have decided to go into seclusion for a period of time." "This is indeed a good thing. Your Majesty becoming a god is what everyone wants. We support your Majesty." The civil and military officials laughed. The emperor smiled and said, "However, during this period of time when I am in seclusion, someone must be in charge of the court. After thinking about it, I finally found a suitable candidate." "Who?" Everyone looked at the emperor in confusion. There was expectation and desire. Being in charge of the imperial court was a good job, and everyone wanted it. The emperor glanced at the officials and said with a smile, "This person is the imperial preceptor. The imperial preceptor is highly respected and resourceful. I am most at ease with him taking charge of the court. I wonder if anyone has any objections?" Hearing this, many people had a trace of disappointment in their eyes. In terms of qualifications and strength, no one can compare to the imperial preceptor. This old official has no objections. This old official has no objections either. Several officials expressed their opinions one after another. When the others heard this, they also shook their heads, indicating that they had no objections. Very good. The emperor's dragon face was overjoyed. He looked at the eunuch on the side and said, "Summon the imperial preceptor." "Yes." The eunuch responded respectfully and said loudly, "Imperial preceptor." Before his voice faded, the imperial preceptor appeared outside the throne room and strode into the throne room. He bowed and said, "This old official greets your Majesty." "Did you hear what I said before?" the emperor asked. "Yes." The imperial preceptor replied respectfully. The emperor asked, "Then are you willing to take on this heavy responsibility?" "This is this old official's honor. This old official will do his best to manage the court and wait for your Majesty to come out of seclusion." The imperial preceptor lowered his head and said, not declining at all, because this was exactly what he wanted. "I believe in you." The emperor nodded, then looked at the officials and said, "If there is anything in the future, there is no need to go through me. You can directly report to the imperial preceptor." "Yes." Everyone replied. The emperor waved his hand and said, "Then you can leave first. I still have things to tell the imperial preceptor." "Oh right, Zhuge Wuho, stay." This official will take his leave. The civil and military officials bowed respectfully, then turned around and left the throne room in an orderly manner. Zhuge Wuho stood below, looking at the imperial preceptor and the emperor, his eyes filled with suspicion. The emperor looked at the eunuch and said, "You can leave as well. Close the door on the way." "Yes." The eunuch replied and quickly ran out, closing the door. After the door was closed, the imperial preceptor waved his hand, and a barrier appeared, enveloping the entire hall. This barrier had the effect of soundproofing. Even if one stood outside the door, they would not be able to hear the sounds inside. Then, the imperial preceptor turned to look at Zhuge Wuho and chuckled. "Are you very puzzled right now?" Zhuge Wuho wanted to say something but hesitated, as if he was somewhat afraid. The imperial preceptor glanced at the emperor, then looked at Zhuge Wuho and smiled. "Don't worry, he's one of us." "One of us?" Zhuge Wuho looked at the emperor in shock. The emperor's face was also full of smiles. The imperial preceptor looked at the emperor and smiled. "Let him see your original body." The emperor nodded and consumed a facial restoration pill. Immediately, whether it was the emperor's figure or face, they all began to change. Finally, a familiar face appeared in Zhuge Wuho's line of sight. If Qin Feiyang was here, he would be able to recognize him at a glance. This person was Zhuge Nanhua. Zhuge Wuho was stunned. Zhuge Nanhua laughed. How is it, are you surprised? Zhuge Wuho was stunned. He looked at the imperial preceptor and Zhuge Nanhua, and asked, what exactly is going on? Zhuge Nanhua said, this is the first step of our plan. At the same time, pagoda. A middle-aged man wearing Kirin armor suddenly descended in front of the pagoda. It was the commander of the Kirin army. Old Man Qin sat cross-legged in front of the pagoda. Sensing the aura of the commander of the Kirin army, he opened his eyes and asked, what are you doing here? Let me tell you a piece of good news. His Majesty is back. The commander of the Kirin army laughed. What? Old Man Qin suddenly stood up, his face full of surprise. He had been guarding the pagoda the entire time. How could he not know that the emperor had returned? What is it? You seem to be very surprised? The commander of the Kirin army looked at Old Man Qin suspiciously. Are you sure that His Majesty is really back? Old Man Qin asked. Yes. He's in the throne room right now. Although I haven't met His Majesty yet, the civil and military officials are all discussing it. And it is said that His Majesty also announced a piece of great news. The commander of the Kirin army said. What good news? Old Man Qin frowned. The commander of the Kirin army laughed. His Majesty has reached the peak of the 9-star combat emperor realm, and is preparing to go into seclusion to comprehend the profound meaning of becoming a god. How could this be? Old Man Qin was confused. He knew very well that the emperor had not returned to the imperial capital. But why would there be an emperor in the throne room? Could it be, suddenly? Old Man Qin seemed to have thought of something. His eyes trembled slightly as he asked, who will be in charge of the imperial court when His Majesty is in seclusion? The commander of the Kirin army said. His Majesty announced in front of the civil and military officials that the state preceptor will be in charge of the imperial court. Old Man Qin was furious. How dare he let someone pretend to be His Majesty? How dare he? The commander of the Kirin army did not know, but Old Man Qin was very clear. He knew what was going on as soon as he heard this. Old man, just you wait. Today, I'm going to fight you to the end. Old Man Qin's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He immediately opened the teleportation door and walked in with great anger. What happened? Chapter 1358. At the same time, Qin Feiyang also received the news. Of course, it was Yan Wei who told him. But Qin Feiyang didn't say anything, nor did he intend to ask. He continued to copy the Xing formula. Looking at Qin Feiyang's performance, Lu Zheng sighed. His heart was filled with helplessness. It seemed that this time, this little cousin of hers had already steeled his heart to not care. Outside the throne room, the civil and military officials had already left, leaving only the eunuch outside the door. Shua. Suddenly, Old Man Qin and the commander of the Kirin army arrived. The eunuch was about to scold him, but when he saw Old Man Qin, he immediately bowed and said, Greetings, Old Man Qin. That old man is here. In the hall. Hearing the voice of the eunuch, Zhuge Wuho's expression changed. The soundproof barrier set up by the imperial tutor was to prevent others from eavesdropping on their discussion. Therefore, they could clearly hear the sounds coming from outside. Don't panic. The imperial tutor waved his hand, dispelled the barrier, and nodded to Zhuge Nanhua. Zhuge Nanhua understood, and immediately took an illusory form pill, turning into the appearance of the emperor. Outside, Old Man Qin glanced at the eunuch, walked to the door, and kicked it open. When he saw the emperor sitting on the dragon throne, his eyes were filled with killing intent. At the same time, seeing Old Man Qin's anger, the eunuch was about to stop him. Scram! Old Man Qin suddenly shouted angrily, and a wisp of divine might rushed over. The eunuch quivered and quickly turned around to run. What is going on? Seeing this scene, the commander of the Kirin army behind Old Man Qin became more and more surprised. Old Man Qin stepped into the throne room. The commander of the Kirin army also prepared to follow in. But the imperial tutor waved his hand, and the door closed with a bang, directly blocking the commander of the Kirin army outside. Following that, he waved his hand again, and the soundproof barrier appeared again. What's wrong? Are you afraid that others will know? Old Man Qin sneered. The Imperial Preceptor smiled faintly and said, "What is there to feel guilty about?" Old Man Qin sneered as he looked at Zhuge Nanhua, who was sitting on top. His entire body emitted a monstrous aura. "You think you can sit in this seat? Get out!" In a flash, Old Man Qin appeared in front of Zhuge Nanhua and slapped him across the face. Ah! With a blood-curdling scream, Zhuge Nanhua was sent flying and crashed into a stone pillar. Blood spurted out from his mouth. The Imperial Tutor and Zhuge Wuhou were shocked. The next moment, the two of them ran to Zhuge Nanhua's side. Zhuge Wuhou supported Zhuge Nanhua. The Imperial Preceptor glared at Old Man Qin and shouted, "Old thing, have you eaten the guts of a leopard? How dare you slap His Majesty?" "Your Majesty?" Old Man Qin's hair stood up in anger as he said, "The one who ate the guts of a leopard is you. You actually dared to let someone impersonate His Majesty. How should you be punished?" The Imperial Preceptor's heart skipped a beat. He frowned and said, "What did you say? What do you mean by impersonating His Majesty?" "Still playing dumb?" Old Man Qin sneered, took out a facial restoration pill, threw it at Zhuge Nanhua's feet, and said, "Whether it is an impersonation or not, you will know after consuming this facial restoration pill." Zhuge Nanhua looked at the facial restoration pill, and looked at the Imperial Preceptor in panic. Zhuge Wuhou's face was also filled with fear. How could Old Man Qin be so sure that the Emperor was an impersonation? One had to know. The Emperor had been killed and his life and death were unknown. Now no one knew where he was. However, the moment Old Man Qin entered the room, he immediately concluded that the Emperor in front of him was an impersonator. This was too strange. Could it be? Suddenly, the Imperial Preceptor, Zhuge Wuhou, and Zhuge Nanhua's eyes trembled at the same time. Could it be that Old Man Qin knew where the real Emperor was? "What are you waiting for? Quickly consume the facial restoration pill. True gold is not afraid of fire. If you are really His Majesty, this old man is willing to die for my previous recklessness." Old Man Qin shouted. Looking at Old Man Qin's sinister eyes, Zhuge Nanhua's heart was filled with panic, and his body couldn't help but tremble. "Ha!" The Imperial Preceptor raised his head and laughed out loud. Old Man Qin's gaze turned and landed on the Imperial Preceptor. His old eyes were filled with bone-piercing killing intent. The Imperial Preceptor stopped laughing and looked at Old Man Qin. "Since you have been discovered, then there is no need to hide anymore. Consume the facial restoration pill." Zhuge Nanhua nodded, grabbed the facial restoration pill, and threw it into his mouth. Very quickly his true appearance was restored. Seeing this, Old Man Qin clenched his fists and said coldly, "You guys are really daring." "Wrong. The one who is daring is you, because you are the one who kidnapped the Emperor. Hurry up and tell me, where is the Emperor now?" The Imperial Preceptor shouted. "Heard of it." Old Man Qin's body stiffened as he cursed in his heart. In a moment of anger, he had actually overlooked this point. Without even asking, he directly attacked Zhuge Nanhua. Wouldn't this expose the fact that he knew the whereabouts of the Emperor? No. He couldn't admit it. Old Man Qin muttered to himself, looked at the Imperial Preceptor, and sneered. "After being together for so many years, this old man only realized now that you are actually such a shameless person." "What do you mean?" The Imperial Preceptor raised his eyebrows. "You let Zhuge Nanhua impersonate His Majesty, but in the end, this old man saw through it and wanted to bite back, saying that this old man kidnapped His Majesty and wanted to kill this old man. How can your heart be so vicious?" Old Man Qin shouted angrily. "A bunch of nonsense." The Imperial Preceptor also glared at him. "Don't talk nonsense. Impersonating His Majesty will lead to the extermination of 9 generations. Immediately bring Zhuge Nanhua and Zhuge Wuhou, follow this old man to the back mountain of the Imperial Palace, and wait for Emperor Hong to deal with them," Old Man Qin said. Emperor Hong. Hearing this name, Zhuge Nanhua and Zhuge Wuhou's bodies and minds trembled, and their eyes were filled with despair. "Emperor Hong," the Imperial Preceptor muttered. But suddenly, the Imperial Preceptor smiled playfully, looked at Yiglao and mocked. "Exterminate 9 generations? Don't be so naive, I'll tell you the truth. This imperial preceptor has already obtained the permission of Emperor Hong to do this. What? Old Man Qin's body stiffened, and he said in shock and anger, "How is that possible? Obtain the permission of Emperor Hong?" Zhuge Wuhou and Zhuge Wuhou were also stunned, and then hurriedly looked at the imperial preceptor and asked, "Is this true?" The imperial preceptor nodded. The two of them were overjoyed, and their suspended hearts were finally put down. The imperial preceptor glanced at Zhuge Wuhou and Zhuge Wuhou, then looked at the imperial preceptor and said in a deep voice, "Emperor Hong definitely wouldn't allow you to do such a thing. How can you prove it? Do you want to prove it? This imperial preceptor will give it to you." The imperial preceptor smiled contemptuously, and a golden light flew out from his chi-si, landing in front of Old Man Qin. It was a piece of golden paper, as if it was cast from gold, flickering with divine light. On it, there was only one big word, Hong. But this word, like iron hooks and silver strokes, carried a great majesty, directly pressing down on Old Man Qin's heart. The imperial preceptor sneered. "You also recognize Emperor Hong's words, so confirm it properly and see if it was written by Emperor Hong himself, so as to avoid slandering this imperial preceptor again." Old Man Qin did not seem to hear it. Looking at the word Hong on the paper, his old face was filled with disbelief. Why is this so? Such an absurd thing, Emperor Hong, why did you agree to it?" he muttered to himself, his heart in chaos. The imperial preceptor stepped forward, snatched the paper, and carefully kept it in his chi-si. Then he looked at Old Man Qin proudly and said, "Tell me, how is your mood now?" This old man doesn't believe it. This old man will ask Emperor Hong in person. Old Man Qin said, "Whatever." The imperial preceptor smiled coldly. Old Man Qin looked at him deeply, then waved his hand, shattering the enchantment set up by the imperial preceptor. Then he opened the teleportation door, turned around and walked in. When the teleportation door dissipated, the imperial preceptor set up another soundproof enchantment. Zhuge Wuhou and Zhuge Wuhou immediately ran in front of the imperial preceptor and asked in surprise, "Old ancestor, was that really written by Emperor Hong himself?" "Of course." The imperial preceptor nodded. The two of them looked at each other, their faces full of disbelief. Zhuge Nanhua asked curiously, "Old ancestor, how did you convince Emperor Hong?" "This matter is a long story. When there is time, this old man will slowly tell you. Now go and do something for me," the imperial preceptor said, his eyes filled with cold killing intent. "What is it?" the two of them asked. The imperial preceptor said, "Kill people, the more the better. This old man wants to use them to refine blood fiend pills and increase the strength of our Zhuge family as soon as possible." "Yes," the two of them respectfully replied, their eyes filled with a bloodthirsty light. The imperial preceptor continued, "In addition, you must protect the little prince well. This child is now a treasure, and there cannot be the slightest mistake." "Understood." The two of them nodded. "Also, as long as the emperor's corpse is not found, this old man's heart will not be at ease. You must find his corpse as soon as possible," the imperial preceptor said. "The Great Qin Empire is so big, how do we find it?" The two of them frowned. "Pay attention to Old Man Qin. This old man has a feeling that he knows the whereabouts of the emperor. This damned old thing, always going against this old man. When this old man ascends to the throne, the first thing I will do is kill him." The imperial preceptor coldly snorted, his killing intent bone-chilling. "Then what if the emperor is not dead?" Zhuge Wuhou said. The imperial preceptor did not hesitate and laughed sinisterly. "It was not easy to take this first step. This old man does not want to turn back, so the emperor must die." Zhuge Wuhou and Zhuge Wuhou looked at each other, bowed to the imperial preceptor, and turned to walk in front of the barrier. The imperial preceptor waved his hand, and a door of light appeared on the barrier. The two of them walked out of the door of light, opened the teleportation door, and left together. The imperial preceptor waved his hand again, and the door of light quickly closed. Then, he turned around and looked at the dragon throne above. After a moment of silence, he walked towards the dragon throne step by step, and a smile appeared on his old face. As he got closer, The smile on his face became brighter and brighter. Finally, he stood in front of the dragon throne, stretched out his old hand, and gently stroked the armrest of the dragon throne. Gradually, his arm couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, a strong desire crawled up in his eyes. Suddenly, the imperial preceptor turned around and sat upright on the dragon throne, looking down at the hall below with a blazing gaze. In a trance, he seemed to have already seen the scene of all the civil and military officials kneeling down and worshipping him. The first step has been successful. Next is the second step. Just wait, it won't be long before the Great Qin Empire changes its name. My Zhuge family will eventually rule this territory. And I, Zhuge Xinyan, will also replace Qin Batian and become the #1 emperor of all time. Those who obey me will prosper, those who oppose me will die. Haha. Chapter 1359. Dong. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The imperial tutor raised his eyebrows and his eyes flashed coldly. He stood up from the dragon throne and walked into the hall. He removed the soundproof barrier and said, "Come in." The door was pushed open. The commander of the Kirin army stood outside the door and scanned the hall suspiciously. "What's the matter, Commander?" The imperial tutor smiled. The commander of the Kirin army quickly entered the hall and bowed. "Greetings, imperial tutor. May I ask where His Majesty is?" The imperial tutor said, "His Majesty has gone into seclusion to cultivate. You can report to me if there's anything." "Nothing much. It's just that I haven't seen His Majesty for a long time, and I miss His Majesty." The commander of the Kirin army smiled. The imperial tutor smiled and said, "The commander is loyal to His Majesty. It's really a blessing for the Great Qin." But there was a trace of killing intent in his smile. In fact, a long time ago, he personally looked for the commander of the Kirin army and wanted to recruit him as his confidant. After all, the commander of the Kirin army controlled the entire Kirin army. If he could recruit the commander of the Kirin army and the invincible Black Army, then the entire imperial palace would be under his control. But the commander of the Kirin army was too loyal to the emperor. No matter what conditions he offered, he would not agree. If he couldn't recruit him, then he could only eliminate him. But in the past it was inconvenient for him to do it because the emperor was there. But now he could do whatever he wanted and no one could stop him. "If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave." The commander of the Kirin army looked at the imperial tutor. His eyes flashed slightly and he cupped his hands. After that, he turned and walked out without waiting for the imperial tutor's response. He was so eager to leave, not because he saw the killing intent in the imperial tutor's eyes, but because he felt uncomfortable being alone with the imperial tutor. "Wait." The imperial tutor looked at the back of the commander of the Kirin army and suddenly said. The commander of the Kirin army froze. He looked back at the imperial tutor and asked, "Do you have any other orders? Do you remember what I told you before? Now, I'll give you another chance. As long as you follow me, I'll let you enjoy endless glory and wealth." The imperial advisor said, "My lord, this is the throne room. Isn't it inappropriate to talk about this in the throne room?" The Kirin army commander narrowed his eyes and asked cautiously. "Haha." The imperial preceptor laughed and shook his head. "You're too naive. Since you can't be used by me, then I can only." The Kirin army's commander felt a strong sense of uneasiness before the Grand Master could finish his words. Without any hesitation, he turned and rushed out of the door. "You want to leave?" The Grand Master's face was full of sarcasm. His divine power was like a waterfall, directly imprisoning the commander of the Kirin army in the void. "Imperial tutor, this is the imperial palace. What do you want to do?" The commander of the Kirin army shouted. "Since you won't obey, then this imperial preceptor can only kill you to prevent you from becoming an obstacle to this imperial preceptor in the future." The imperial preceptor's eyes were brimming with undisguised killing intent. He had heard of it. The commander of the Kirin army's heart sank. The imperial preceptor raised the corner of his mouth and raised his arm. The false god power surged at the tip of his index finger. Feeling the terrifying killing intent, the commander of the Kirin army felt a chill down his spine. He couldn't help but feel despair. He shouted, "I surrender." "That's more like it. This Imperial Preceptor likes people like you who can adapt to the situation." The Imperial Preceptor laughed proudly and formed a seal with both hands. The Blood Soul technique was formed. Blood Soul technique. The commander of the Kirin army's expression changed. Although the Blood Soul technique was a secret technique, he knew a thing or two about it. Whoosh. The mark formed by the Blood Soul technique entered the body of the commander of the Kirin army. Ah! The commander of the Kirin army screamed in pain. The Imperial Preceptor looked at the commander of the Kirin army with a smile on his face. Currently he controlled the Tribunal Council and the Invincible Black Army. Now that he had the Kirin army, the Great Qin Empire was basically in his pocket. But just as the Imperial Preceptor was feeling complacent, a sudden change occurred. The Imperial Preceptor's body shook violently as he spat out a mouthful of blood. The majesty that imprisoned the commander of the Kirin army also dissipated in an instant. The commander of the Kirin army flew into the air without hesitation and fled in panic. But in his heart he was extremely surprised. What was going on? He clearly felt that he was about to be controlled by the Imperial Preceptor's Blood Soul technique, but a mysterious force suddenly appeared in his mind and instantly destroyed the Imperial Preceptor's Blood Soul technique. How is this possible? In the throne room, the Imperial Preceptor's face was filled with disbelief. Wait! This situation is exactly the same as when I controlled Lei Bao. Could it be related to Qin Feiyang again? Damn little bastard! You dare to ruin this Imperial Preceptor's plans again and again. This Imperial Preceptor will not let you off. The Imperial Preceptor roared in his heart. He then flew out of the hall and stood in the air above the throne room, scanning the surroundings. Soon, he found the commander of the Kirin army. He suddenly found that the commander of the Kirin army was heading in the direction of the Bright Sky Palace. To the Bright Sky Palace. Could it be that the commander of the Kirin army has already surrendered to Qin Feiyang? The Imperial Preceptor raised his eyebrows and did not pursue, because once he left the throne room, he would not dare to attack the commander of the Kirin army again. After all, the commander of the Kirin army held great power and had an important position in the imperial capital. If he were to be killed in public, it would arouse criticism from others. Most importantly, it would attract the attention of those old monsters in the back mountain of the imperial palace. This was not a good thing for the Imperial Preceptor. Of course, he was not worried that the commander of the Kirin army would spread the news, because the commander of the Kirin army knew his methods. He also knew that even if he spread the news, not many people would believe him. Qin Feiyang opened the door. "I have something to see you." Bright Sky Palace. The commander of the Kirin army panted as he landed in front of the palace and knocked hard on the door. Qin Feiyang heard it from inside the castle, but he turned a deaf ear. Bang! The commander of the Kirin army was burning with anxiety. He opened the door with a palm, only to see that it was empty inside. He ran into the main hall and closed the door, shouting, "I know you are in the castle. Come out quickly. I really have something important to tell you." However, inside the main hall, there was still a dead silence except for the commander of the Kirin army's roar. Back mountain of the Imperial Palace. At a certain mountain stream, there was a dense fog and a cold wind blew. It seemed unfathomable. An old man with white hair walked out of the fog. It was old Qin. But at this moment, he staggered and his eyes were lifeless. His two arms hung weakly as if he had lost his soul. "What should I do?" he muttered to himself, his old face full of helplessness. He continued to walk like a walking corpse. Unknowingly, he left the back mountain and entered the Imperial Palace. Unknowingly, he came to the front of the Bright Sky Palace. Qin Feiyang has already left. What is this old man doing here? The sins of heaven can be forgiven, but the sins brought on by oneself are the hardest to bear. The situation today is all caused by this old man. If this old man was not careless and let His Majesty use the divine order from the beginning, how could things be like today? Old Qin shook his head and laughed at himself. He was ready to leave. "Qin Feiyang, please come out and see me, okay?" Suddenly, the voice of the commander of the Kirin army came from the Bright Sky Palace. Old Qin was slightly stunned and turned to look at the closed door. Why was the commander of the Kirin army inside? Old Qin walked to the door with doubts and pushed it open. The commander of the Kirin army thought it was Qin Feiyang and was overjoyed. But it was Old Qin. Old Qin entered the main hall and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Close the door first," the commander of the Kirin army said. Old Qin turned around and closed the door. He then looked at the commander of the Kirin army and said, "Looking at your anxious look, did something happen?" The commander of the Kirin army said in a deep voice, "Just now in the throne room, the imperial advisor was going to kill me." "What?" Old Qin's body stiffened and said angrily, "How dare he kill the commander personally appointed by His Majesty? Does he still have the law in his eyes?" The commander of the Kirin army said, "When His Majesty was here, he restrained himself. But now that His Majesty is dead, I'm afraid that the law is useless in his eyes. We can't let him continue like this. Otherwise, the imperial palace will be in chaos." After Old Man Qin finished speaking, he scanned the hall's surroundings and pleaded, "Qin Feiyang, now that the imperial palace is in danger, please help us out for the sake of the late emperor. Yes. We don't ask for anything else. We just ask that you come out and suppress the arrogance of the imperial advisor," the commander of the Kirin army said. After waiting for a while, Qin Feiyang didn't respond. Old Qin said angrily, "Do you want me to kneel down in front of you before you agree?" The commander of the Kirin army turned around and looked at Old Qin. Seeing Old Qin's sad and angry face, he frowned and said, "Old Qin, what's going on? Why did Qin Feiyang suddenly leave us alone?" "It's all my fault." Old Qin sighed, and his face was full of self-blame. He then looked at the void and said, "No matter how you blame me, you can't just sit and watch in the face of the big picture." Plop. After that, Old Qin really knelt down. The commander of the Kirin army was dumbfounded. Who was Old Man Qin? He actually put down his self-esteem and face to kneel down in front of Qin Feiyang? What on earth had happened that he didn't know about? The commander of the Kirin army shouted angrily, "Qin Feiyang, Old Qin has already knelt down in front of you. What else do you want? As a subject of the Great Qin Empire and the successor of the late emperor, how can you ignore the crisis of the Great Qin Empire? I'll also kneel down in front of you. Please come out." With a plop, the commander of the Kirin army also knelt down on the ground, his face full of helplessness. Time passed by slowly. The hall gradually fell into a dead silence. Old Qin and the commander of the Kirin army were suffering in their hearts. Whoosh! Suddenly, a white figure appeared in front of them out of thin air. But it was not Qin Feiyang, but Lu Zheng. The two of them looked up at Lu Zheng. Old Qin was naturally familiar with Lu Zheng, but the commander of the Kirin army was full of surprise. Of course, he also knew Lu Zheng. When the second grandpa of the Lu family entered the imperial palace to play chess with the state preceptor, Lu Zheng was beside him. But why was this person by Qin Feiyang's side? "Where is Qin Feiyang?" Old Qin asked. Lu Zheng looked at the two of them and sighed. "Old Qin, commander, you'd better get up first. My little cousin can't accept such a big gift. If he doesn't come out, I won't get up." The commander of the Kirin army shook his head. "Why do you have to do this?" Chapter 1360. What? The commander of the Kirin army was shocked. He turned to look at Elder Qin and asked, "Do you know where His Majesty is?" Elder Qin smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I don't know." "Elder Qin, don't treat us like fools, okay? You helped His Majesty plot against my cousin. How could you not know?" Lu Zheng sneered. "Plot against Qin Feiyang? What's going on?" The commander of the Kirin army was confused. How many more things were these people hiding from him? Elder Qin said, "I admit that I was wrong, but His Majesty didn't tell me where he was going before he left." "Really?" Lu Zheng asked. Once a person lost his integrity, it was difficult to trust him again. Elder Qin said, "I swear that if I lie, I'll be destroyed." Lu Zheng furrowed his brows. He dared to make such a vicious oath. It seemed that Elder Qin really didn't know. Lu Zheng said, "Then why did His Majesty pretend to be dead and leave the capital? Don't tell me you don't know either." Pretend to be dead? The commander of the Kirin army looked at Elder Qin in surprise. Elder Qin felt bitter. He looked at Lu Zheng and said, "If I say I don't know, will you believe me?" "What do you think?" Lu Zheng asked. Old man Qin let out a long sigh and said, "Back then, this old man told Qin Feiyang that the current His Majesty is completely unpredictable. Although this old man can see that he is hiding a lot of things in his heart, he has never told anyone." The commander of the Kirin army said, "I can prove that because I also found out something. But His Majesty didn't say anything, and as a subject, I didn't dare to ask. And I also found that he doesn't trust anyone, including me," the commander of the Kirin army added. Lu Zheng couldn't help but feel agitated. What on earth was this person trying to do? Old man Qin said, "Call Qin Feiyang out. This old man has something very important to tell him." Lu Zheng calmed himself down and said, "My little cousin can hear you from the castle. You can speak freely." Old Qin said in a solemn voice, "I wonder if you guys have heard of Emperor Hong, this person?" Emperor Hong. Lu Zheng's gaze trembled. The face of the Qilin army commander was also instantly filled with fear that could not be removed. Whoosh! Just as old man Qin finished speaking, Qin Feiyang appeared out of thin air, his face filled with shock. Seeing Qin Feiyang finally appear, old man Qin and old man Qin were overjoyed. Even his eyes were a little blurry. Qin Feiyang said, "Get up. Kneeling like this will shorten my lifespan." The two of them then stood up. Qin Feiyang looked at old man Qin and asked, "Why are you mentioning Emperor Hong?" Old man Qin said, "I believe you have received the news of the imperial advisor's actions in the throne room, right?" Qin Feiyang nodded. Old man Qin asked, "Then do you know who is impersonating His Majesty?" "Who?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Zhuge Nanhua." Old man Qin said word by word, his eyes shining with a cold light. "What?" His Majesty was impersonated by Zhuge Nanhua. The commander of the Kirin army was once again dumbfounded. He looked at the three of them and roared, "How many more things are you hiding from me? Don't worry, you'll know everything later." Old man Qin looked at the commander of the Kirin army and said, then looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "At that time, this old man was very angry and was ready to kill Zhuge Nanhua. But do you know? Everything the imperial advisor did had already been approved by Emperor Hong." "Emperor Hong is not dead?" Lu Zheng was surprised. Qin Feiyang was also shocked. Old man Qin said, "Yes, Emperor Hong is not dead. He has been cultivating in the back of the mountain, but he has not appeared for a long time, and does not care about the affairs of the world." Everyone mistakenly thought that he had already passed away. Qin Feiyang's heart was immediately set off by stormy waves. He knew better than anyone else the identity of this Emperor Hong. Moreover, not only was his status noble, his strength was also extremely strong. He was a legendary peerless figure. It was no exaggeration to say that even the current emperor had to obey an order from Emperor Hong. It was indeed as old man Qin had said. Many people thought that Emperor Hong had already passed away. But who would have thought that he was still alive and well? The commander of the Kirin army asked, "Why would Emperor Hong agree to such an absurd act of the imperial advisor?" For this matter, this old man specially went to find Emperor Hong. Emperor Hong said that a family cannot be without a master for a day, and a country cannot be without a ruler for a day. Now that His Majesty's whereabouts are unknown, we must prepare for the worst. If His Majesty doesn't return or dies outside, then someone must take over the throne. Old man Qin said. The commander of the Kirin army frowned and said, "If that's the case, then we can let the little prince directly inherit the throne. But why let the imperial advisor take over the court first?" On one hand, the imperial advisor is highly respected and has outstanding ability. No one is more suitable than him. On the other hand, Emperor Hong also has some concerns. Old man Qin said. "What concerns?" Lu Zheng asked. "Civil unrest. If the little prince directly inherits the throne, it will inevitably cause a sensation. At that time, it may even shake the foundation of the great Qin Empire. After all, the inheritance of the throne is not a trivial matter. It will involve a lot of things. Another thing, if the little prince inherits the throne now, What will happen if the emperor comes back alive in the future? So there needs to be a transition period here. Old man Qin said. So it's like this. In order to avoid causing panic, Emperor Hong allowed the imperial advisor to let Zhuge Nanhua pretend to be his majesty and announce in public in the throne room that he would go into seclusion to break through to the false god realm. And with this fake imperial edict, no one will have any objections to the imperial advisor taking over the court. Lu Zheng suddenly said. That's right. Old man Qin nodded and said angrily, but Emperor Hong doesn't know the real purpose of the imperial advisor. The imperial advisor is simply using Emperor Hong to achieve his ambitions. Qin Feiyang said indifferently. You can tell Emperor Hong that the emperor is not dead. If I could say it, would this old man still be standing here begging you? When His Majesty arrived at the Butterfly Valley, he told this old man not to reveal the news that he is not dead to anyone. Old man Qin sighed helplessly. This is what you deserve. Don't expect us to sympathize with you. Lu Zheng snorted coldly. Old man Qin's heart was extremely bitter. Qin Feiyang said, what you just said should be the first step of the imperial advisor's plan. What is the second step of his plan? Wait. Old man Qin said. Wait. The commander of the Kirin army and Lu Zheng looked at each other, their eyes full of suspicion. He is waiting for the right time. Qin Feiyang thought for a while and said, yes. After a while, if His Majesty still hasn't returned, he will continue to let people pretend to be His Majesty and fake imperial edicts. His Majesty has successfully broken through to the false god realm. However, after breaking through to the false god realm, His Majesty is already tired of everything in the secular world. He chose to continue to cultivate in seclusion and pass the throne to the little prince. At that time, the little prince will be able to inherit the throne legitimately. Old man Qin sighed. Emperor Hong also agreed to this? Qin Feiyang asked. This is what Emperor Hong told me personally. Of course he agreed. And Emperor Hong also said that in a few days, he will take the little prince to the back of the mountain and personally train him. Old man Qin was worried, and his expression was extremely haggard. Little prince, Qin Feiyang murmured and said with a smile. I have no objections to letting the little prince inherit the throne. Old man Qin's expression froze, and he said angrily, you know that His Majesty is not dead, and you still say such things. Isn't that too much? Besides, do you think that the imperial advisor will really support the little prince? He's just using the little prince. In other words, the little prince is purely a puppet. In the end, he will definitely die in the hands of the imperial advisor. Old man Qin was furious. He never thought that Qin Feiyang would actually agree with the little prince inheriting the throne. Of course I know. But I'm more willing to see what expression the emperor will have when he returns and finds that his own son has replaced him and sat on the throne of the emperor. Qin Feiyang joked. Little cousin, don't forget the imperial jade seal. The imperial jade seal must be in the hands of the emperor now. As long as the imperial jade seal is still there, no one can take away his throne. Lu Zheng said. My original thoughts were the same as yours, but when I found out that Emperor Hong was not dead, I changed my mind. Do you know why? Because as old man Qin said, the inheritance of the emperor's throne is related to the foundation of the country. If the little prince really ascends to the throne, Emperor Hong will not allow the emperor to ascend to the throne again, because this is too childish. Although the emperor has the imperial jade seal in his hands, it doesn't mean much, because as long as Emperor Hong says a word, he will obediently hand it over. Unless he can rush back to the imperial capital before the little prince inherits the throne, otherwise, no matter how he struggles, he will lose everything forever. Qin Feiyang sneered. When old man Qin heard these words, his gaze trembled slightly. He actually didn't think of this point. Lu Zheng frowned and said, then the little prince inherits the throne. He will need the imperial jade seal, right? Isn't that simple? They even dare to pretend to be the emperor. How difficult is it to forge an imperial jade seal? Qin Feiyang said indifferently. Old man Qin's gaze trembled, and he hurriedly said, Qin Feiyang, you can't treat your father like this. Although he did do a lot of things to let you down as a son, can't you be a little more magnanimous? Magnanimous? Have you ever tasted the feeling of being abandoned and living a life worse than death? Have you ever tasted the despair of falling from heaven to hell overnight? Have you ever tasted the pain of being hurt by the father you respect and rely on the most? Have you ever tasted the torture of not being able to recognize your mother, even though she's right in front of you? You haven't. Then may I ask, what qualifications do you have to talk to me about these principles here? Qin Feiyang roared, his eyes bloodshot. Old man Qin fell silent. Actually, when I first returned to the imperial capital, if he was willing to tell me the reason, even if he had made 1,000 mistakes, I would have forgiven him. But he didn't. Not only did he not, but he continued to hurt me. The most unforgivable thing is that he actually hurt Mother. Do you know? Every time I think of what happened to Mother all these years, my heart feels like it's stabbed with a knife, bleeding and hurting. How I wish that the person who suffered in the imperial palace was me, not Mother. Chapter 1361. Looking at Qin Feiyang's painful expression, Lu Zheng and the commander of the Kirin army fell silent. Old Qin was unable to refute, because it was the truth. The reason why Qin Feiyang hated the world so much was because of the emperor. After a long time, Lu Zheng let out a long sigh. He stepped forward and patted Qin Feiyang's shoulder, comforting him. Everything will be fine. Qin Feiyang smiled reluctantly. He looked at Old Qin and waved his hand. I'm not in the mood to talk to you. Let's go. The commander of the Kirin army was anxious. He was about to say something. Forget it. There's nothing to say now. Let's go. Old Qin stopped the commander of the Kirin army. He took a deep look at Qin Feiyang and turned to leave. The commander of the Kirin army sighed helplessly and could only follow him. Qin Feiyang looked up at the back of the commander of the Kirin army and said, "Be careful. The Grand Master wants to kill you. He didn't succeed this time, but he won't give up easily in the future." I know. I plan to follow Old Qin in the future. But there's a question that I can't figure out. Why didn't the Grand Master's blood soul skill control me? The commander of the Kirin army stopped and looked at Qin Feiyang. Because of the slave seal. Qin Feiyang said. I see. You've indirectly saved my life. The commander of the Kirin army shook his head and laughed at himself. Then he left with Old Qin. Bang. Lu Zheng waved his hand and the door closed. Then he looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "What are you going to do?" "I'll make whoever makes me suffer despair." A cold light flashed in Qin Feiyang's eyes. Just as Qin Feiyang was about to bring Lu Zheng into the castle, a red-clothed old man appeared out of thin air outside the main hall. This person was about 1.75 meters tall. His body was stooped, but he seemed to be in high spirits. His hands were behind his back, and his fiery red hair fluttered in the wind. He stood outside the hall and glanced at Bright Heaven Palace. Then, without asking for Qin Feiyang's permission, he strode into the hall. At the same time, his wrinkled old face was filled with arrogance. Qin Feiyang looked at the red-clothed old man and frowned slightly. Lu Zheng also had a trace of doubt in his eyes. After the red-clothed old man entered the main hall, he swept his eyes over the layout of the main hall. Although Qin Feiyang and Yi Shiwen were right in front of him, he turned a blind eye to them, treating them like air. Do you know him? Lu Zheng secretly transmitted his voice to Qin Feiyang. The red-clothed old man's arrogant attitude made him very unhappy, but the old man's aura was unfathomable, so he did not dare to act rashly. I was just about to ask you. Qin Feiyang thought to himself. What? You don't know? I don't know either. It's rare to see someone that you and I don't know in the Great Qin Empire. Lu Zheng was incredulous. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows and looked at the red-clothed old man. Who are you? Why have you barged into my Bright Heaven Palace? Your Bright Heaven Palace? The red-clothed old man was taken aback. He turned to Qin Feiyang and said indifferently, Someone who has been expelled from the imperial capital actually has the right to occupy Bright Heaven Palace? What a joke. Although his tone was calm, it was full of contempt. Deliberately picking a fight? Qin Feiyang and Lu Zheng looked at each other, the same thought creeping into their minds at the same time. The last time I came back, I said that no one is allowed to enter Bright Heaven Palace without my permission. I don't care who you are. Get out at once. Qin Feiyang shouted. When he saw that Qin Feiyang was enraged, Lu Zheng smiled playfully and retreated to the side knowingly. He crossed his arms and waited for the show to begin. Earlier on, this cousin of his was already filled with anger from old Qin's provocation, and was worried that he had nowhere to vent it. However, he did not expect that someone would take the initiative to approach. Wasn't that just asking for a beating? As for the identity of the red-clothed old man, it was not important to Qin Feiyang at all. That was because even if the heavens were to descend, he would still beat them up without hesitation. However, when he heard Qin Feiyang's words, the red-clothed old man did not restrain himself at all. Instead, he became even more brazen and insolent. He looked at Qin Feiyang with contempt. Who do you think you are? How dare you yell at me? Me. Qin Feiyang narrowed his eyes slightly. Anyone who dared to call themselves that was not simple. He sized up the red-clothed old man carefully. He discovered that this person's aura was comparable to Zhuge Nanhua's. In other words, this person was a super expert at the peak of the 9-star War Emperor realm. However, so what if he was a super expert at the peak of the 9-star War Emperor realm? If it was in the past, he might still be afraid. But now, if the false god did not appear, who could do anything to him? Qin Feiyang chuckled and said, Then Junior would like to ask Senior, who do you think you are? Seeing this smile, the playful look on Lu Zheng's face became even more intense. The red-clothed old man was so angry that his beard blew and his eyes widened. He said angrily, How dare you? Do you know who I am? Do you know the consequences of offending me? Qin Feiyang smiled and said, Then do you know the consequences of offending me? Qin Feiyang? Boom. The red-clothed old man was furious. A terrifying pressure pounced towards Qin Feiyang. As expected, he was a super expert at the peak of the 9-star War Emperor realm. After confirming the red-clothed old man's cultivation, Qin Feiyang's eyes also surged with a cold light. With a wave of his hand, the three of them immediately disappeared without a trace. The next moment, Qin Feiyang, Lu Zheng, and the red-clothed old man appeared in the ancient castle. Junior Leopard, Old Wang, hurry up and attack. The white-eyed wolf immediately roared. Lei Bao, Wang Yangfeng, and the others immediately pounced towards the red-clothed old man. The movements outside could be heard from the ancient castle, and the white-eyed wolf knew Qin Feiyang's character and temper like the back of his hand. Therefore, when he heard the red-clothed old man's words outside, the white-eyed wolf knew that Qin Feiyang would definitely not let this person off easily. So, he had already asked Lei Bao, Seal Seahorse, Wang Yangfeng, and the others to prepare early in the morning. Finally, sure enough, it was as expected. Qin Feiyang brought the red-clothed old man to the ancient castle. There was no suspense. Facing Lei Bao, Wang Yangfeng, and the others who were ready to attack, the red-clothed old man was directly beaten to the ground. His entire body was dripping with blood in an instant, and miserable howls could be heard incessantly. His qi was shattered by Lei Bao at the first moment. You are simply too presumptuous. How dare you beat me? Quickly stop, then kneel down and apologize to me. Otherwise, I will not let you off easily. The red-clothed old man howled and roared at the same time. He was almost crazy. How dare you be so arrogant? Continue to beat him up. Today, I will beat you until you kneel down and beg for mercy. The white-eyed wolf shouted. Wang Yangfeng and the others looked at each other and silently retreated to the side. Because they were all old people, they were somewhat unable to do such a thing as bullying the young with numbers. But Lei Bao, Seal, and Seahorse were all shameless people. They did not care so much. They would beat him up first. It hurts. Stop beating him. Accompanied by the miserable screams that sounded like a pig being slaughtered, the red-clothed old man's nose and eyes were swollen in a short while. His whole body was covered with bruises, and he was in an extremely sorry state. And Qin Feiyang, with his hands behind his back, stood at the side like a sharp sword, his face shining with a cold light. Lu Zheng leaned against the wall at the side, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and looked at the red-clothed old man gloatingly. Qin Feiyang, if you don't make them stop, I can guarantee that you will regret it for the rest of your life. The red-clothed old man had been beaten to the point that he could not get up from the ground, but he was still so arrogant. He raised his head and looked at Qin Feiyang, his eyes filled with a sinister light. Qin Feiyang said expressionlessly, "Whether you will regret it or not, I don't know, but I know that you might die today." Hearing this, the red-clothed old man's gaze trembled, and he roared, "I am someone by Emperor Hong's side, you dare to kill me?" "What? Emperor Hong's people?" As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. The Thunder Leopard and the other two beasts couldn't help but stop and look at Qin Feiyang. Although they didn't know who Emperor Hong was, hearing the conversation between Qin Feiyang and Elder Qin, it wasn't hard to imagine that he was definitely a terrifying existence. Lu Zheng also frowned, his expression somewhat solemn. Only Qin Feiyang was still expressionless. He didn't say anything, and only looked at the red-clothed old man. At this moment, the red-clothed old man couldn't help but panic, because the look in Qin Feiyang's eyes right now made him feel afraid, and it was a kind of fear that came from the depths of his soul. So what if your Emperor Hong's people continue to beat him up? Suddenly, Qin Feiyang said coldly, "Order received." With Qin Feiyang's words, what else was there to worry about? The Thunder Leopard and the other two beasts swarmed forward again. The leopard's claws, the horse's hooves, like a torrential storm, landed on the red-clothed old man's body. The red-clothed old man's life was worse than death. He never would have thought that after knowing that he was one of Emperor Hong's men, Qin Feiyang would still dare to continue beating him up. "Stop hitting me, stop hitting me. If you keep hitting me, I'll die. I'm begging for mercy, it's my fault." He was truly afraid. He looked at Qin Feiyang pleadingly and cried out. Qin Feiyang turned a deaf ear to him. It wasn't until the Thunder Leopard and the other two beasts had beaten the red-clothed old man's body that Qin Feiyang waved his hand, indicating for the three beasts to retreat. "Overestimating yourself. Reckless fool. I don't know what I'm talking about." The Thunder Leopard and the other two beasts looked at the red-clothed old man with disdain, then retracted their claws and hooves and retreated to the side. The red-clothed old man was about to get up. After all, he was a super expert at the peak of the 9-star War King realm. These injuries were not fatal. But Qin Feiyang took a step forward and stepped on the red-clothed old man's head. Bang! The red-clothed old man's face was once again in close contact with the ground. "I was wrong, I was blind, please spare me," the red-clothed old man wailed. Qin Feiyang said, "Answer me, did you come to find me yourself, or did Emperor Hong ask you to come find me?" "It was Emperor Hong who asked me to come," the red-clothed old man said. Qin Feiyang asked, "Why is Emperor Hong looking for me?" The red-clothed old man hurriedly said, "He asked me to come and invite you to the back of the mountain. As for why, I don't know either." Qin Feiyang said, "Since you're inviting me to the back of the mountain, then you still dare to be so impudent in front of me?" I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." The red-clothed old man hurriedly apologized. Qin Feiyang loosened his foot, retreated to the side, lowered his head and muttered to himself, "Emperor Hong actually wanted to see him." Chapter 1362. Do you want to go? Lu Zheng glanced at Qin Feiyang and asked telepathically, "When I was young, I wanted to see this legendary figure, but unfortunately, I thought he was dead. Now that I have this opportunity, of course I have to go and see. Moreover, I also want to know what his attitude will be after seeing me." Qin Feiyang thought to himself with a complicated look in his eyes. "Then you be careful," Lu Zheng warned. Qin Feiyang nodded, picked up the old man in red, and left the ancient castle. He then opened the portal, and directly descended above the entrance of the back mountain of the Imperial Palace. At the entrance, there was a large number of Kirin army guards. Qin Feiyang. Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, the Kirin army suddenly changed their expressions as if they were facing a great enemy. "Those who block the way will die." Qin Feiyang glanced at them indifferently and passed by them openly. Then, under the guidance of the old man in red, he flew toward the depths of the back mountain of the Imperial Palace. None of the Kirin army dared to stop him. However, after Qin Feiyang disappeared, they immediately released the news. What is he doing in the back mountain? The Imperial advisor received the news, and his old face was full of surprise. At the same time, Old Qin and the Kirin army commander were also full of doubts. After a while, Qin Feiyang came to a black fog. The black fog covered the mountains and the earth in all directions. There were no beasts or plants in the area covered by the black fog. It was barren like a forbidden zone of death. Although Qin Feiyang rarely entered the depths of the back mountain of the imperial palace, he was no stranger to this place and the black fog. This black fog was called the soul-devouring fog. It had a strong penetrating power that could easily penetrate the sea of consciousness and erode the soul. And the god's prison that made people tremble in fear was also in there. Qin Feiyang glanced at the soul-devouring fog and frowned. Did you bring me to the wrong place? This soul-devouring fog required at least a 9-star combat emperor to resist. What do you mean? The red-clothed old man was confused. This is clearly the location of the divine prison, and you brought me here. Don't tell me that Emperor Hong is currently in the divine prison? Qin Feiyang said. He's not in the divine prison. However, if you want to go to Emperor Hong's residence, you must pass through here, because Emperor Hong lives at the back of the divine prison. The red-clothed old man was afraid that Qin Feiyang would misunderstand that he had ulterior motives, so he quickly explained. Qin Feiyang said, "Then take out the token." A token was required to pass through the soul-devouring fog. This token could release a golden barrier to isolate the soul-devouring mist. The commander of the Kirin army had won. When he went to save his mother, it was the commander of the Kirin army who led him into the god's prison. I didn't. The old man shook his head. No. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. The red-clothed old man said, "With my cultivation, I can completely ignore this soul-devouring fog. How could I have a token?" That makes sense. Qin Feiyang nodded. The red-clothed old man said, "Why don't you rest here for a while? After I repair my qi, I'll bring you in?" Is it necessary? Qin Feiyang laughed disdainfully. Right now, he had a 9-star war emperor and a 9-star emperor beast by his side. Not to mention, now that the castle could move, even without the help of the token and the 9-star war emperor, he could freely travel through the soul-devouring fog. Qin Feiyang grabbed the red-clothed old man and entered the castle. Then he drove the castle straight in. Soon, he saw the divine prison. As usual, the divine prison was located on top of a mountain. It was like an ancient beast, emitting a heart-palpitating aura. And in front of the divine prison, there were 2 black-robed men guarding. They were like 2 stone sculptures, sitting cross-legged on the ground without moving. The aura emitted from their bodies was also extremely terrifying. Of course, their identities were not simple either. Even when the commander of the Kirin army saw them, he had to respectfully address them as ancestor. However, at this moment, the castle flew past the divine prison, and they did not notice it. After brushing past the divine prison, the castle continued to fly deeper into the divine prison. About 100 breaths passed. The castle finally flew out of the soul-devouring fog's area, and what entered the scene was a vibrant mountain range. The mountains were lush with vegetation, and wild flowers were blooming. Clear rivers ran through the east, west, north, and south like giant dragons. Moreover, there were also many fierce beasts here. Every fierce beast had reached the War Emperor realm. However, they were very well behaved and quietly cultivated, making this place seem especially peaceful, like a paradise. I didn't expect that there would be such a peaceful place hidden in the back mountain of the imperial palace. Qin Feiyang brought the red-clothed old man, and appeared above a mountain ridge. He scanned the mountains below with a surprised expression. The fierce beasts in the mountain stream also discovered Qin Feiyang. But not a single fierce beast went to find trouble with Qin Feiyang. They all looked at him curiously. Where do we go now? Qin Feiyang retracted his gaze, looked at the red-clothed old man and asked. Continue forward about 20 miles and you will see a huge mountain. Emperor Hong is there. The red-clothed old man said. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and brought the red-clothed old man, cutting through the sky like lightning. Not long after, he saw the huge mountain that the red-clothed old man had mentioned. The huge mountain was more than 1,000 feet tall, surrounded by mist, and auspicious beasts were flying. A waterfall poured down from the top of the mountain, converging into a lake at the foot of the mountain. The lake was about a few hundred feet long, and the water rippled. In the lake, groups of colorful fish swam happily. Around the lake, there was a patch of green. The lotus leaves were slender and elegant, and the lotus flowers were blooming one after another. Some of them were blooming, competing for beauty, while some were budding, like young girls in their boudoir. An inconspicuous courtyard sat quietly by the lakeside. The courtyard was large but very old. A neat row of wooden fences surrounded the courtyard. Inside there was a vegetable garden, a flower garden, a pavilion, a stream, and a two-story wooden building. This place was full of simplicity and tranquility. And in this tranquility, a white-haired old man sat alone by the lake. In front of him was a stone table. On the stone table, a teapot and a teacup were neatly placed. The teacup was filled with tea, and the fragrance of the tea assailed the nose. And in the old man's hand, he was also holding a teacup. He slowly tasted the tea while admiring the beautiful scenery of the lake, incomparably comfortable. He is Emperor Hong. The red-clothed old man pointed at the white-haired old man and said to Qin Feiyang, his expression full of respect. Qin Feiyang raised his head to look at the white-clothed old man. The old man's back was facing Qin Feiyang, so Qin Feiyang could not see the old man's face. But from the old man's back, Qin Feiyang saw a transcendent aura, as if he was a god from beyond the heavens. Come here. Suddenly, the old man's voice sounded, without the slightest hint of strength. It was flat and indifferent, making people feel very comfortable. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and walked over in large strides. The lake rippled, and a few small red carps jumped out of the lake, as if welcoming Qin Feiyang, and then jumped back into the lake, splashing waves. Qin Feiyang walked to the old man's side. The old man smiled and said, "The tea is prepared for you, sit down." Qin Feiyang looked at the teacup on the stone table, threw the red-clothed old man on the ground, and then walked to the opposite side of the old man and sat on the stone bench. Immediately, the old man's face entered Qin Feiyang's line of sight. It was a very kind face. Although the old man's face was covered with the traces of time, his eyes were very bright, and there was no aggressive feeling. He was very peaceful, giving people a sense of approachability. Qin Feiyang picked up the teacup, put it to the tip of his nose and smelled it, but did not drink it. He put down the teacup again, and did not look at the old man again, turning his head to look at the clear lake. Emperor Hong also did not speak, quietly tasting the tea. The red-clothed old man got up, looked at Qin Feiyang with resentment, ran to the side of Emperor Hong and shouted, "Lord, you have to uphold justice for me." "What?" Emperor Hong asked with a smile. "I kindly invited him over, but he didn't know what was good for him, and actually let his subordinates and fierce beasts humiliate me. Look, the injuries on my body were all caused by them. They even destroyed my sea of qi," the red-clothed old man said with grievance. Emperor Hong looked at the red-clothed old man, shook his head and smiled. "It's already lucky to be able to keep your life. What else do you want to do?" "Leave." The red-clothed old man still wanted to say something. Emperor Hong waved his hand. Seeing this, the red-clothed old man's expression was suddenly filled with helplessness. He turned around and disappeared into the wooden building in the courtyard with a belly full of resentment. Emperor Hong glanced at Qin Feiyang and continued to drink tea. Sigh. After an unknown period of time, Qin Feiyang sighed faintly, turned his head to look at Emperor Hong and said, "Should I call you Emperor Hong? Or should I call you great-grandfather?" "Great-grandfather?" Inside the castle, hearing Qin Feiyang's words, whether it was the white-eyed wolf and the other beasts, Lu Hong, Wang Yangfeng, and the others, they were all dumbfounded. Outside, when Emperor Hong heard this, he put down his teacup, lowered his head in silence for a while, and said with a smile, "You can call me whatever you want, even if you call me old man, I won't mind." "Lu Zheng, what the hell is going on? How did Emperor Hong become little Qin Zi's great-grandfather?" Inside the castle, the white-eyed wolf looked at Lu Zheng in surprise. Wang Yangfeng and the others also looked at Lu Zheng, their faces full of suspicion. Sigh. Lu Zheng sighed deeply and said, "Emperor Hong was originally little cousin's great-grandfather, and Emperor Hong has two other identities." "What identity?" the white-eyed wolf asked. "The biological son of the late emperor, the second emperor of the Great Qin Empire. Lu Xing said. What? Everyone's expression changed. The biological son of the late emperor? The second emperor of the Great Qin Empire? God! This old man's identity was too terrifying. No wonder even the state preceptor and elder Qin were so respectful to Emperor Hong. By the lake. Qin Feiyang looked at Emperor Hong quietly, and then shook his head with a smile, and said indifferently, I am a person who has been expelled from the imperial palace. What qualifications do I have to call you great-grandfather? It's better to call you Emperor Hong, so as to avoid falling into the hands of others, saying that I, Qin Feiyang, am trying to climb up the ranks. As long as you're happy. Emperor Hong smiled. There was no reluctance, as if in his eyes, Qin Feiyang was really not a descendant of his Qin clan. Qin Feiyang laughed at himself. Originally, he thought that when Emperor Hong heard his words, he would feel a little regret, but in the end he was very disappointed. Actually, although Qin Feiyang hated the emperor, he did not hate everyone. Chapter 1363. Because Emperor Hong was his great-grandfather after all. Blood was thicker than water. If just now, Emperor Hong could show even the slightest bit of regret, Qin Feiyang would respectfully call him great-grandfather. What a pity. He didn't see it. Was it sad? He felt that he was indeed quite sad. As a descendant of the Qin clan, he was actually so unrecognized. After letting out a long breath, Qin Feiyang looked at Emperor Hong and said, I don't want to talk nonsense, just say it. Why are you looking for me? Emperor Hong looked at Qin Feiyang in astonishment and said with a smile, I've often heard people say that you are a swift and decisive person. It really isn't false at all. Since that's the case, then this old man will not beat around the bush. Qin Feiyang looked at him calmly. Emperor Hong asked, Not long ago, what happened in the throne room? I believe you have already received the news, right? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. Do you know the reason? Emperor Hong asked. Qin Feiyang said, I know everything. Emperor Hong was slightly taken aback, and asked suspiciously. The emperor was impersonated by Zhuge Nanhua. You know that too? What are you trying to say? Qin Feiyang began to get impatient. Emperor Hong laughed. Young man, don't be so impatient. This old man wants to know who told you. Old Qin. Qin Feiyang did not hide it. Because if Emperor Hong wanted to investigate, he would definitely not be able to hide it. So that's how it is. Emperor Hong nodded his head in realization, and said with a smile, It's good that you know, lest this old man say another word and waste time. Qin Feiyang frowned and asked in confusion, What do you mean? And you plan to tell me these things personally? Yes. Emperor Hong nodded. Why? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. Emperor Hong said, Because this old man wants you to know the truth, and only after knowing the truth can I cut off your thoughts. The more Qin Feiyang listened, the more he felt that something was wrong, and said, What thoughts do I have? Emperor's throne. Emperor Hong drank a mouthful of tea, raised his head to look at Qin Feiyang, and said, Whoosh. Qin Feiyang suddenly stood up, his eyes burning with anger. It turned out that this old man was worried that he would covet the throne. Emperor Hong smiled and said, Don't tell this old man that you don't have any thoughts about the throne? Haha. Qin Feiyang raised his head and laughed out loud. She had specially called him over because she suspected him? Great-grandfather? Family? Haha, what a joke. At this moment, his heart was as cold as steel. He, Qin Feiyang, would rather not have such a family. Qin Feiyang returned to the stone bench. The respect in his heart for Emperor Hong had already vanished without a trace. He sneered and said, Are you so sure that I have thoughts about the throne? Emperor Hong said, If you don't have any thoughts, why did you kill the princes back then? Just because I killed the princes, it means that I have designs on the throne? Old man, is that all you can think of? Qin Feiyang chuckled and said, not concealing the ridicule. Emperor Hong was not angry either. He smiled faintly and said, This old man's head might not be as good as yours, but this old man's strength, I'm afraid that you will never be able to catch up in this lifetime. Haha. Qin Feiyang laughed loudly again and said, Are you very strong? At least stronger than you, isn't it? Emperor Hong said with a smile. That's true. After all, you have lived for at least 10,000 years, and I have only lived for a few decades. In terms of strength, I definitely can't compare to you. Qin Feiyang said with a smile. As long as one was not a fool, the meaning behind these words could be understood. It was clearly mocking Emperor Hong. Emperor Hong also did not know if he was really broad-minded, or was he enduring? There was not the slightest trace of anger on his face. It was as calm as ever. It's useless to say more. This old man just wants to tell you, if the emperor is really harmed, the little prince will be the only successor to the throne. As for you, you can live in the imperial capital, but the prerequisite is that you don't do anything out of line. After all, you are no longer a member of my Qin clan. This old man can give you a better suggestion. Where did you come from? Where did you come from? You have a free and unfettered life, and we also have a relaxed and carefree life. Why not? Emperor Hong said with a smile. Makes sense. Qin Feiyang nodded. Emperor Hong's words were originally very angry words, but at this moment, Qin Feiyang did not feel the slightest bit of anger. His heart was as calm as the Dead Sea. Seeing Qin Feiyang nod, Emperor Hong's face was full of praise. He chuckled and said, "The child can be taught. Don't laugh so happily. What I said makes sense, but it doesn't mean that I have to listen to you. Just now, you said to let me go back to where I came from. Then now I want to ask you, where did I, Qin Feiyang, come from? Iron Ox Town? Or Imperial Palace?" Qin Feiyang said. Emperor Hong fell silent. He originally wanted Qin Feiyang to return to Iron Ox Town. However, after being reminded by Qin Feiyang, he realized that Qin Feiyang was born in the Imperial Palace. A moment later, Emperor Hong raised his head to look at Qin Feiyang and said with a smile, "You can live in Bright Heaven Palace, but don't touch things that you can't touch. Don't worry, I'm not interested. And on the contrary, I will help the little prince ascend to the throne." Qin Feiyang said with a smile. Emperor Hong frowned for the first time, because this answer surprised him too much. He asked suspiciously, "Why are you doing this?" "Because the little prince is my younger brother. He's still young and inexperienced. Of course I have to help him. Moreover, if I'm not by his side, I'm still a little worried. After all, the current imperial palace is too chaotic. What if someone wants to harm him?" Qin Feiyang chuckled. Emperor Hong was silent. He looked at Qin Feiyang, trying to distinguish the truth from Qin Feiyang's expression. But in the end, he couldn't see anything. Qin Feiyang said indifferently, "Is there anything else?" Emperor Hong said, "Take care of the people and beasts around you. Don't let them continue to mess around in the imperial capital." A small matter. Qin Feiyang's face was full of smiles. After saying that, he got up and said, "Then I'll take my leave." Emperor Hong nodded. Qin Feiyang immediately turned around and strode away. But suddenly, he stopped again, turned his head to look at Emperor Hong, and said with a grin, "I forgot to tell you one more thing." "Speak." Emperor Hong laughed. 30 years in the east, 30 years in the west. Today I, Qin Feiyang, am indeed unable to catch up to your strength. But remember, one day, I, Qin Feiyang, will let you have a taste of what it's like to be unable to catch up." Qin Feiyang said. "This old man is waiting, and I'm looking forward to it." Emperor Hong said with a faint smile. "Don't worry. I won't let you wait too long." After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, with a wild laughter, he cut through the sky like lightning and disappeared into the horizon. Emperor Hong looked in the direction where Qin Feiyang disappeared, his eyes flickering. At this time, the red-clothed old man walked out of the wooden building. His qi had been repaired, and his injuries were almost healed. He raised his head and looked in the direction where Qin Feiyang disappeared, then quickly walked to the side of Emperor Hong and bowed. "My lord, you are his great-grandfather. He actually dares to be so presumptuous." "Great-grandfather," Emperor Hong muttered, shook his head and smiled, then retracted his gaze, picked up his teacup, and while sipping his tea, he looked at the lake and said, "If you want to say something, just say it. Don't beat around the bush." The red-clothed old man said, "I want to say that I can't let him continue to be so arrogant. If necessary, I have to let him suffer. Let him suffer. Do you have the ability? If so, you wouldn't have fallen into such a sorry state before. Emperor Hong laughed. I don't, but my lord does. With my lord's strength, if you want to teach him a lesson, isn't it just a matter of waving your hand? The red-clothed old man said. Emperor Hong sighed and said, there is a saying that blood is thicker than water. Although he is in the wrong, how can I bear to hurt him? Moreover, he has also obtained the inheritance of my father. The red-clothed old man said, my lord, you are raising a tiger. Raising a tiger? Emperor Hong smiled disapprovingly and said, do you really think that he will surpass me one day? I admit his talent is very good. But becoming a deity isn't an easy thing either. How many unparalleled geniuses are there in the world? Which one wasn't astonishingly talented when they were young? But in the end, how many can become a deity? Just like you, when you were young, you were also considered a monster. But now, aren't you still trapped at the peak realm of 9-star combat emperor, unable to advance an inch? Becoming a deity, what is needed is not just talent, but also mental state. Qin Feiyang, your obsession is too deep. Fate is already set. There is no chance to become a deity. Emperor Hong said with a faint smile. To even be able to see this, my lord really has discerning eyes. The red-clothed old man's face was full of admiration. Bright Heaven Palace. Qin Feiyang returned to Bright Heaven Palace and directly entered the ancient castle, continuing to copy the third stroke of the line character formula. Looking at Qin Feiyang's back view, Fatso and the rest all had looks of wanting to say something but hesitated. If you don't want to say it, then go away. Big brother will say it. The white-eyed wolf pushed away Fatso and the others, walked behind Qin Feiyang and said, little Qin Zi, Big brother really feels that it's not worth it for you. Why? Qin Feiyang asked without turning his head. In these 2 years, in order to deal with Mu Tianyang and the state preceptor, you have been running around everywhere and fell into desperate situations several times. Now this Emperor Hong, not only did he not say a word of gratitude, he even targeted you like this. This is simply too much. The white-eyed wolf was furious. Yes. He actually wants to drive you out of the imperial capital again. In Fat Lord's opinion, he doesn't treat you as family at all. Fatso snorted coldly. Qin Feiyang retracted his arm, turned to look at Fatso and the white-eyed wolf, and asked, then in your opinion, how should I fight back? Fat Lord says that you have to do what he doesn't want you to do. Fatso said. Yes. Didn't he tell you not to think about the throne? Why don't we just think of a way to snatch the throne? The white-eyed wolf's eyes flashed fiercely. Emperor Hong has already made up his mind to let the little prince inherit the throne. How can it be as easy as you say to snatch it? Lu Jing shook his head. The white-eyed wolf laughed and said, what if the little prince dies? Lu Jing was shocked and hurriedly looked at the white-eyed wolf saying, don't mess around. The little prince now has Emperor Hong's support. If you dare to touch him, none of us will be able to escape. What are you afraid of? What kind of storm have we not seen before? The white-eyed wolf said disdainfully. You're digging your own grave. Lu Jing coldly snorted, looked at Qin Feiyang and said, don't listen to the white-eyed wolf. If you really want to go against Emperor Hong, we can take our time and think about it. Don't use such radical methods. Qin Feiyang smiled and said nothing. With a faint smile he said, let's all cultivate. Finished. Qin Feiyang then turned around and continued to copy the Xing formula. Don't come up with bad ideas in the future. It will only harm little cousin. Lu Jing glared at the white-eyed wolf and Fatso, and also walked to the side to continue cultivating. The white-eyed wolf and Fatso pursed their lips. Looking at the wrong Qin Feiyang, they were very unhappy. Chapter 1364. After Fatso and White-Eyed Wolf entered the state of cultivation, the others also closed their eyes and calmed down to cultivate. Qin Feiyang also didn't say a word, silently copying the Xing formula. Inside the castle, it gradually calmed down, showing a peaceful atmosphere. But outside, there was an undercurrent surging. The first was the imperial preceptor. Although the first step of the plan had been completed, he didn't dare to relax at all. Because in his heart, there was always a thorn. This thorn was undoubtedly the emperor. So next, he spared no expense and sent all the people he could trust to various places in the Great Qin Empire, including the 9 provinces, to find the whereabouts of the emperor. Of course, the people who went to find the emperor were all very low-key. Because once the news was leaked, the news of the emperor's death would immediately spread throughout the Great Qin Empire. This was not the result that Emperor Hong wanted to see. As for Elder Qin and the commander of the Kirin army, at first, they were looking for various reasons to prevent the imperial preceptor's people from entering the 9 provinces. Because they knew that the emperor was in the 9 provinces. Preventing the imperial preceptor's people from entering the 9 provinces was equivalent to protecting the emperor. But soon, they realized that everything they had done was useless. Because now, the imperial preceptor had the support of Emperor Hong, and was like the sun in the sky. It was impossible to stop the imperial preceptor. So, they could only give up. At the same time, they could only silently pray for the emperor in their hearts. In addition, the descendants of the Zhuge family were also slowly becoming active. But their active way was to clamor for Qin Feiyang. Especially Zhuge Jinghong, who asked Xia Chongjin to slander Qin Feiyang in the temple all day long. He said that Qin Feiyang was timid, cowardly and incompetent, and didn't dare to accept Zhuge Jinghong's challenge. The reason he did this was naturally to provoke Qin Feiyang. However, Qin Feiyang, who received the news, didn't take it seriously at all. However, Qin Feiyang's silence caused Zhuge Jinghong to become even more aggressive and say anything. In the end, he even asked Xia Chongjin to insult Qin Feiyang's mother. Because everyone in the capital knew that the person Qin Feiyang cared about the most was his mother. Hence, Zhuge Jinghong felt that this would definitely infuriate Qin Feiyang. It was not only Zhuge Jinghong, all of the disciples of the War God Hall thought the same. That day, many disciples who usually did not show their faces came out of seclusion and gathered at the fighting arena, anticipating the arrival of Qin Feiyang. But when night fell, Qin Feiyang still did not appear. Everyone returned in disappointment. Disappointed, he couldn't help but shake his head in mockery. His mother was humiliated in public, but he didn't even show up. What an idiot! However, on the second day, something happened that shook the entire temple. Someone discovered the corpses of Zhuge Jinghong and Xia Zhongjin in the fighting arena early in the morning. The 2 of them were chopped into 8 pieces and thrown into the center of the arena. Their deaths were extremely tragic. That bloody scene caused countless disciples to be terrified. That was because they didn't sense any battle fluctuations in the War God Temple that night. In other words, Zhuge Jinghong and Zhuge Jinghong were assassinated soundlessly. One must know, Zhuge Jinghong was an 8-star combat emperor. To kill him soundlessly, even a 9-star combat emperor might not be able to do it. Furthermore, the War God Temple had an elder and a hall master overseeing it. The elder and the hall master were both 9-star combat emperors. Who was the culprit behind this? To actually be able to kill Zhuge Jinghong and Xia Zhongjin under the noses of 2 9-star combat emperors? But very quickly, everyone thought of one person. And the person they thought of was still the same person. Qin Feiyang. Xia Zhongjin insulted Qin Feiyang's mother that day, and the 2 of them were assassinated at night. If this was not done by Qin Feiyang, who else could it be? This time, no one dared to mock Qin Feiyang anymore. Even the name Qin Feiyang had become a taboo in the War God realm. But because of Zhuge Jinghong's death, the Zhuge family's hatred towards Qin Feiyang became even more intense. No one cared about Xia Zhongjin. But Zhuge Jinghong was Zhuge Nanhua's adopted son. At such a young age, he broke through to an 8-star combat emperor, and could be said to be a monster. His future was limitless. It was even possible for him to step into the false god realm. Losing such a talent, if it was any other martial marquis, it would be impossible for them to remain indifferent. On the day Zhuge Jinghong died, Zhuge Nanhua and Zhuge Wuho barged into the Haotian palace in a rage, demanding Qin Feiyang to give them an explanation. But from the beginning to the end, they did not even see Qin Feiyang's face. They were definitely not reconciled, so they went to find the imperial tutor and asked him to make the decision for them. After all, the imperial tutor was now in charge of the imperial court. Everything in the Great Qin Empire was now under his control. However, not only did the imperial tutor not make the decision for them, he even reprimanded them. He even said that Zhuge Jinghong was courting death. Who was Qin Feiyang? Was he someone that Zhuge Jinghong could provoke? And he even dared to insult his mother? In today's world, who didn't know that Qin Feiyang's mother was his reverse scale, and anyone who touched it would die? Of course. Losing a monstrous descendant, the imperial tutor was also very angry. However, as a cunning old fox, he wisely chose to endure. Because right now, it was not suitable to fight with Qin Feiyang. Time was like sand between fingers. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. That morning, inside the throne room, after the imperial tutor finished dealing with the imperial court, he let the civil and military officials and the head eunuch leave, leaving only Zhuge Wuhou behind. Bang! The door closed. The imperial tutor set up a soundproof barrier and sat on the dragon throne once again, looking down at Zhuge Wuhou from above. Zhuge Wuhou's expression changed and he hurriedly said, "Ancestor, be careful of the walls having ears." "No worries." The imperial tutor waved his hand and asked, "How is the progress?" Sigh. Zhuge Wuhou shook his head and sighed. "Our people have searched almost the entire Great Qin Empire, but we have never found the whereabouts of the emperor." The imperial tutor frowned and asked, "What about Elder Qin?" "It won't work either. That old thing is too vigilant. Our people can't get close to him at all." Zhuge Wuhou's brows were filled with anger. The more he acts like this, the more suspicious he is. The imperial tutor snorted coldly. Zhuge Wuhou said helplessly, "Even so, he is still a fake god. What can we do to him?" The imperial tutor lowered his head and muttered to himself. A moment later, a cold light flashed in his eyes as he said, "If this drags on, it won't be a good thing for us. We must confirm the life and death of the emperor as soon as possible." "What is the ancestor's opinion?" Zhuge Wuhou asked. The imperial tutor frowned and said, "This old man has thought of a plan, but it's a bit radical." "What plan?" Zhuge Wuhou asked. The imperial tutor said, "Come closer." Zhuge Wuhou walked in front of the imperial tutor. The imperial tutor muttered in a low voice. After listening, Zhuge Wuhou's eyes lit up. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "This plan is indeed a bit radical, but it is the only way right now. Qing Hai Nephrite, this old man will personally go to the Sea of Samsara to look for it. I'll leave the rest to you. Remember, you must do it flawlessly. Don't let Emperor Hong see any clues." The imperial tutor instructed in a low voice. "Understood." Zhuge Wuhou nodded. The imperial tutor waved his hand, and the sound barrier dissipated. Zhuge Wuhou turned around and walked in. Just as Zhuge Wuhou walked out of the throne room, a black-clothed man with a sinister appearance walked towards him. This person was Yan Wei. When the two met, Yan Wei cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Wuhou." Zhuge Wuhou nodded his head, looked at Yan Wei with contempt, and then left in large strides. Looking at Zhuge Wuhou's back, a cold light flashed in the depths of Yan Wei's eyes. He then entered the throne room and bowed. "Greetings, Lord Imperial Tutor." The Imperial Tutor asked, "Is there any movement from Qin Feiyang's side?" These days, the Imperial Tutor had always asked Yan Wei to monitor Qin Feiyang near the Bright Sky Palace. Nothing. These days, this subordinate hasn't seen a single person. Elder Qin and the commander of the Kirin army also haven't gone to look for him. Yan Wei replied respectfully, "This little bastard. What exactly is he doing? This old man doesn't believe that he has been cultivating all this time." The Imperial Tutor frowned. In his heart, Qin Feiyang was even more difficult to deal with than Emperor Hong. Emperor Hong, as the son of the previous emperor and the second emperor, was definitely not an idiot. But fortunately, Emperor Hong did not care about the affairs of the world. So, the Imperial Tutor didn't really care. As for Qin Feiyang, he understood. According to Qin Feiyang's personality, he would definitely not sit back and do nothing. But why was there no movement at all? This caused his heart to be in a mess, unable to settle down. Yan Wei asked. 10 days ago, this subordinate heard that Qin Feiyang went to the back of the mountain? What did he go to the back of the mountain for? The imperial tutor said. This old man has personally investigated. The good thing is that Emperor Hong wants to see him. What? Emperor Hong wants to see him personally? Yan Wei was shocked. The imperial tutor frowned. This old man has been wondering why Emperor Hong is looking for Qin Feiyang. Didn't you ask? Yan Wei said. Who do you think Emperor Hong is? He is the son of the previous emperor, and his strength is even stronger than this old man's. How would this old man dare to ask him about these things? The imperial tutor said powerlessly. Yan Wei's eyes flickered. Wait. Suddenly, the imperial tutor's eyes lit up and said, this old man suddenly thought of someone. Maybe he can tell this old man these things. Who is it? Yan Wei was surprised. Qin Jun. The imperial tutor said. Qin Jun? Yan Wei was stunned. Qin Jun was Emperor Hong's page boy when he was young. This person is loyal to Emperor Hong, and Emperor Hong also takes care of him, so he has always stayed by Emperor Hong's side. The last time this old man went to see Emperor Hong, he was also present. This old man even took the initiative to establish a contract bridge with him. The imperial tutor laughed. He's actually in existence from the same period as Emperor Hong? Yan Wei's face was filled with disbelief and asked. Then his cultivation, isn't it also very strong? His cultivation isn't that great. Peak of the 9-star War Emperor realm. The reason why this old man took the initiative to establish a contract bridge with him is entirely because he is Emperor Hong's page boy. The imperial tutor's face was filled with disdain. Yan Wei laughed bitterly and said, Peak of the 9-star War Emperor realm is not that great? In this world, I'm afraid that only you, my lord, would dare to say such a thing. You don't have to be envious. As long as you serve this imperial tutor wholeheartedly, you will be able to reach his level sooner or later. The imperial tutor said. Yan Wei was overjoyed and bowed. This subordinate will definitely do my best for my lord, until my death. Chapter 1365. Next, the imperial advisor did not let Yan Wei leave. He got up and left the dragon throne, taking out the image crystal. Buzz. Not long later, a stooped old man appeared. If Qin Feiyang was here, he would definitely recognize that this person was the red-clothed old man who had been beaten up by Lei Bao and the other two beasts. The imperial advisor laughed. Brother Qin Jun, I haven't seen you for a few days. How have you been? Greetings, Lord Qin Jun. Yan Wei followed suit and bowed. Qin Jun glanced at Yan Wei, then looked at the imperial advisor and said, This old man was wondering who it was, so it's you. Even in front of the imperial advisor, his expression was incomparably arrogant. You're just a page boy, what are you so arrogant about? The imperial advisor secretly snorted, but on the surface he had a fawning look on his face as he smiled and said, Brother Qin Jun, there's something I want to ask you. What is it? Qin Jun looked at him arrogantly. The imperial advisor suppressed his anger and laughed. Brother Qin Jun is often by Emperor Hong's side. You should know the reason why Emperor Hong was looking for Qin Feiyang 10 days ago, right? Qin Feiyang. Hearing this name, Qin Jun's eyes immediately flashed with an intense cold light. Seeing this, the imperial advisor's heart trembled. Could it be that this person also had a grudge with Qin Feiyang? If that was the case, then for him, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The imperial advisor asked without batting an eyelid. Brother Qin Jun, from the looks of it, you don't seem to like Qin Feiyang? Not only do I not like him, I simply hate him. Qin Jun coldly snorted and said, This old man does know the reason why Emperor Hong is looking for Qin Feiyang. This old man can also tell you, but you must agree to this old man's condition. The imperial advisor was secretly overjoyed and said unhappily, Brother Qin Jun, aren't you treating me like an outsider? With our relationship, is there a need to talk about conditions? If there's anything you need this old man's help with, just say it. This old man will not shirk his responsibility. Haha. Qin Jun laughed out loud, giving a thumbs up. Imperial advisor is indeed a smart person. All right, this old man will be straightforward. This old man wants Qin Feiyang to die. What? Yan Wei was secretly shocked. The state preceptor was also shocked. He didn't expect Qin Jun to hate Qin Feiyang so much that he wanted Qin Feiyang dead. The imperial advisor's eyes flickered as he asked, "May I ask why brother Qin Jun wants to kill Qin Feiyang?" At that time, this old man was under the orders of Emperor Hong to bring him to the back of the mountain. However, this little bastard actually had the fierce beasts around him cripple this old man's qi, and even bully this old man in every possible way. Who does he think he is? A crippled prince who is worse than a pig or a dog dares to do such a disrespectful thing to this old man. Therefore, I must make him pay the price. Qin Jun said harshly, his face detestable. This little bastard is really bold. The imperial tutor was secretly speechless. He looked at Qin Jun and revealed an indignant look. Brother Qin Jun is right. This little bastard doesn't know what's good for him. I also hate him. It seems like this old man has met a kindred spirit. Qin Jun chuckled. Haha. The state preceptor laughed out loud, patted his chest and said, Brother Qin Jun, don't worry. When this old man finds the opportunity, I will personally send him to you and let you deal with him. Qin Jun laughed and said, At that time, this old man will definitely make him suffer a fate worse than death. The state preceptor's eyes flashed as he asked with a smile, Then can brother Qin Jun tell me now? Qin Jun said, Emperor Hong is not looking for Qin Feiyang to help him, nor to recognize him as his great-grandson. Then why? The state preceptor was puzzled. Qin Jun smiled and said, It's to warn Qin Feiyang not to covet the throne of emperor. The two of them are very unhappy. What? The state preceptor was stunned. He never thought that there would be such a result. Brother Qin Jun, are you serious? He also did not believe it. After all, Emperor Hong was Qin Feiyang's great-grandfather. How could he do this? It's absolutely true. Qin Jun nodded. Great. When the state preceptor heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. As long as Emperor Hong did not recognize Qin Feiyang, then no matter how heaven-defying Qin Feiyang's methods were, no matter how smart his brain was, he could not set off any big waves. Qin Jun frowned again and said, But there's one thing that this old man can't figure out. What can't figure out? The state preceptor became nervous again. As long as it was about Qin Feiyang, he did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. Qin Feiyang told Emperor Hong that he would not snatch the throne of emperor, but would instead help the little prince ascend to the throne? Do you think he's stupid? Qin Jun despised. This. The state preceptor and Yan Wei looked at each other. Help the little prince ascend to the throne? What kind of situation was this? How could Qin Feiyang be so kind? Qin Jun said, This old man has already told you everything I know. Don't forget the promise you made to this old man before. Between the words, there was a hint of threat. Relax, this old man will definitely do what I say. The state preceptor said with an obsequious smile. Finished talking, he turned off the image crystal. A hint of killing intent immediately flashed in his old eyes as he said with a cold snort, Old fart, I'll let you be arrogant first. Sooner or later, this old man will destroy you. He could not hold any sand in his eyes. Today, Qin Jun flaunted his prowess in front of him. In the future, he would definitely make Qin Jun pay back double. Yan Wei said, Your Excellency, will talk about Qin Jun's matters slowly in the future. The urgent matter is to quickly investigate what exactly Qin Feiyang wants to do? Yeah. This little beast actually wants to help the little prince ascend to the throne? He really caught this old man off guard. But this boy's actions are secretive and hard to guess. Wanting to find out his goal is basically impossible. The state preceptor's face was full of helplessness. Sometimes, even he could not figure out how a young man who had lived for less than 100 years could be so shrewd. Then what do? We can't just sit back and do nothing, right? How about this subordinate continue to monitor Bright Heaven Palace? Yan Wei asked. Forget it. He hides in the ancient castle all day. No matter how long you monitor him, you won't get anything. Furthermore, even if he leaves the ancient castle, you won't be able to find anything with his intelligence. There's no need to waste your energy. In short, although I don't know why he wants to help the little prince, it's still good news for this old man. Now, follow me to the Sea of Reincarnation, the state preceptor said. Sea of Reincarnation? Yanwei was stunned and asked in surprise, what are we going there for? To look for Qinghai Nephrite. With that said, the state preceptor opened the teleportation gate and walked in. Qinghai Nephrite. Yanwei frowned and followed the teleportation gate with a belly full of doubts. It was also that evening. Within the ancient castle, Qin Feiyang's image crystal suddenly rang. He retracted his arm and took out the image crystal. Yanwei's image appeared. Looking at the endless ocean behind Yanwei, Qin Feiyang was stunned and asked suspiciously, "You're in the Sea of Reincarnation?" "Yes." Yanwei nodded. Qin Feiyang frowned and said, "What are you doing there?" Yanwei said, "The state preceptor is nearby now. Let's have a long talk." Seeing Yanwei's solemn expression, Qin Feiyang could not help but become serious and said in a deep voice, "Speak." There has been no news of the emperor these days, and the state preceptor is very worried. Therefore in the morning he came up with a plan with Zhuge Wuhou in the throne room. Find someone to pretend to be the emperor's corpse and find a piece of Qinghai Nephrite to imitate the imperial jade seal. Yanwei was about to continue when Qin Feiyang waved his hand and said, "You don't have to say any more. I know what they are going to do." Yanwei was slightly stunned and said in admiration, "Young master is indeed the young master. All right, I'll go find the state preceptor first. You deal with it on your side. Oh right, you have to be careful of one person, Qin Jun." Qin Jun? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Yanwei immediately told Qin Feiyang about Qin Jun's identity and his conversation with the state preceptor. So it's that old man. Qin Feiyang suddenly understood and said with a faint smile, "It's just a 9-star combat emperor. There's nothing to worry about. The main goal now is to deal with the state preceptor. You have to tell me the rest of the news." "All right." Yanwei replied and turned off the image crystal. Lu Zheng opened his eyes and asked in confusion, "Little cousin, what is the state preceptor doing?" "He can't wait any longer. He asked someone to pretend to be the emperor's corpse and imitate the imperial jade seal. He wants to deceive the world and deceive Emperor Hong. Because once he sees the emperor's corpse and the imperial jade seal, Emperor Hong will definitely choose a time to let the little prince inherit the throne." Qin Feiyang said. Lu Zheng frowned and said, "Isn't this method too radical?" "That's right. But the state preceptor is more worried that there will be changes if we delay." Qin Feiyang said, "The emperor's corpse can be impersonated, but the imperial jade seal was personally forged by the late emperor. As the son of the late emperor, Emperor Hong is more familiar with it than anyone else. I'm afraid that no matter how realistic his forgery is, it will be seen through by Emperor Hong. He's digging his own grave by doing this." Lu Zheng sneered. Qin Feiyang said, "But don't forget, the state preceptor has been by the emperor's side for so long. He is also very familiar with the imperial jade seal." Lu Zheng fell silent. Of course, the state preceptor's biggest purpose is to deliberately provoke Elder Qin. Qin Feiyang said again. "Provoke Elder Qin for what?" Lu Zheng was puzzled. Last time in the throne room, Elder Qin exposed Zhuge Nanhua's identity without saying a word. With the state preceptor's brain, he must have thought that Elder Qin knows the whereabouts of the emperor. How do you think Elder Qin will react when he learns of this? He will definitely be furious. But Elder Qin can't say it. What can he do? In a hurry, Elder Qin will most likely go to the 9 provinces to find the emperor. In this way, the state preceptor can follow Elder Qin to find the emperor. Now that the state preceptor has begun to take action, he will definitely not allow the emperor to return to the capital alive. Qin Feiyang said lightly. He wants to kill the emperor? Lu Zheng frowned. From the moment he took the first step, he had no choice and no way out. He must be killed. Because if the emperor comes back before the little prince succeeds the throne, Elder Qin will definitely tell the emperor everything that has happened during this period. When the emperor knows, will he still trust the state preceptor? At that time, it will be the end of the state preceptor. Qin Feiyang said with a faint smile. If the little prince failed to succeed the throne, the emperor would still be the emperor. Although the emperor's strength was not as strong as the state preceptor, as the ruler of a country he still had a way to deal with the state preceptor. However, there was one sentence that Qin Feiyang did not say in public. The state preceptor would come to him soon. Because not only the state preceptor and Emperor Hong were familiar with the imperial jade seal, but he also knew it like the back of his hand. Chapter 1366. Sigh. Hearing all this, Lu Hong opened her eyes and said with a sigh, "The scheming inside this imperial palace really makes people afraid. Isn't that so? If you're not careful, you'll be smashed to pieces. I really miss my life in the Yan County. Although there were intrigues at that time, it wasn't as scary as it is now." Fatso shook his head and sighed. Qin Feiyang laughed. "That's why when you guys followed me into the imperial capital, I asked you guys to think about it carefully. Do you want to come or not? Wait. Don't think that we're really afraid. We're just sighing," Fatso immediately said. Lu Hong also nodded her head repeatedly, like a chicken pecking at rice. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled, then turned around and continued to copy the Xing character. Seeing this, Fatso asked suspiciously, "Boss, after hearing the news about Yan Wei, don't you have any plans?" "Of course. However, it's not time yet." Qin Feiyang laughed without turning his head. Before he took action, he had to do his best to improve his cultivation. These days passed. 2/3 of the third stroke had already been completed. After careful calculation, Qin Feiyang had already spent a total of 20 days on this third stroke. 20 days. Only 2/3 of it was completed. In other words, it would take another 10 days to completely copy it. A full 30 days. Compared to the second stroke, it was almost twice as long. In fact, 30 days was nothing to cultivators. It passed in the blink of an eye. But one had to know. This was calculated according to the time outside. In the time of the ancient castle, 30 days was 300 days. This was almost a year's time. In other words, if there was no ancient castle, Qin Feiyang would need close to a year to copy the third stroke. And the third stroke would take such a long time, let alone the fourth, fifth, and sixth strokes. It could be said that the change in the ancient castle's time rules was a great fortune for him. Otherwise, he didn't know when he would be able to break through to the 9-star war emperor and step into the false god realm. 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? It was hard to imagine. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. Boom. That afternoon, after continuous hard work, Qin Feiyang finally finished copying the remaining 1/3 of the book. His cultivation had also soared to the level of a 4-star combat emperor. This time, he had broken through 2 minor realms in a row. It could be said that his gains were not small. His eyes flickered as he looked at the 4th stroke of the Xing character. Finally, he closed the book. Whoosh. The next moment, Qin Feiyang appeared in Bright Heaven Palace. During these 10 days, Yan Wei sent back another piece of news. The Qinghai nephrite had been found. To be on the safe side, the imperial tutor found 2 basin-sized soft jades before returning from the Sea of Reincarnation. The real imperial jade seal was made from Qinghai nephrite. Standing in the main hall, Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment, then opened the door and sat on the throne, as if waiting for something. Time slowly passed. Night fell. The full moon hung in the sky and the stars twinkled. The vast star domain gave people a mysterious feeling. Qin Feiyang walked out of Bright Heaven Palace and stood outside the door. Looking at the starry sky, he muttered, "What's beyond the starry sky? What's above War God? Where is the end of the path of cultivation?" For a moment, his mood soared. His consciousness left his body and flew into the starry sky, as if merging with the thousands of stars. He felt the majestic aura of the starry sky. At the same time, he also felt a cold sense of loneliness. Gradually, he involuntarily soared into the sky. Finally, he stood in the sky above the imperial capital like an immortal. His long hair danced in the wind, his clothes fluttered, and the aura of his entire body became ethereal. Moreover, his expression also became like an ancient well without ripples. He seemed to have entered a mysterious realm, and his body and mind had an indescribable carefree feeling. At this moment, the brilliance of the moon seemed to be brighter than before. The light of the stars also seemed to be brighter than before. Qin Feiyang calmly looked at the night sky and slowly closed his eyes. His aura became more and more ethereal. Looking from afar, he was like a god that was about to ride the wind. At this moment, his heart was unprecedentedly quiet. It seemed that he had forgotten everything. What is Qin Feiyang doing up there? Qin Feiyang's abnormality was gradually discovered by people. More and more people raised their heads and looked at Qin Feiyang, their faces full of suspicion. No one knew how long had passed. Qin Feiyang slowly raised his hands and slowly waved them in the void. Soon, an invisible force emerged. But the strange thing was that this invisible force did not have the slightest aura. However, the space around Qin Feiyang started to vibrate slowly because of this invisible force. In the end, it twisted crazily. The void seemed to be about to shatter. The people of the imperial palace below were full of surprise and doubt. Although the invisible force that pervaded around Qin Feiyang did not have the slightest aura, it gave them a fatal sense of crisis. However, Qin Feiyang seemed to be unaware of it. His eyes were still closed, and his hands were constantly waving. But the speed did not change at all. It was very slow. It seemed to be playing in slow motion. There were more and more onlookers below. Some people, in order to see more clearly, even leaped into the air. Whoosh! 2 figures of light broke through the air. It was Yan Wei and the state preceptor. What's the situation? After discovering Qin Feiyang's abnormality, they were slightly stunned and immediately grabbed a eunuch to ask. Greetings, state preceptor. The eunuch hurriedly bowed and then said, I don't know. From just now until now, he has been standing in the air and waving his hands. We don't understand. Hearing this, the 2 of them raised their heads again and looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. On the other side, Elder Qin and the commander of the Kirin army also broke through the air. Without exception, their faces were full of doubts. Time passed breath by breath. Everyone still did not understand. But Yan Wei found a clue. He found that Qin Feiyang was actually repeating the battle art. It was the first move of the ultimate tactics, landslide. But why was there no aura of the battle art? He could not figure it out. But what he could not figure out even more was why Qin Feiyang was doing this. Gradually, Yan Wei also found that Qin Feiyang stopped evolving the first move and began to evolve the second move of the ultimate tactics, earth splitting. It was the same as before, constantly evolving, and there was still no aura of the battle art. There was only that surging invisible force, crazily surging in the void around Qin Feiyang. The void was also distorting more and more. Even in the sky above the imperial palace, there was already the sound of wind. Soon, Yan Wei was surprised to find that Qin Feiyang had begun to evolve the third move of the ultimate tactics, sky splitting. The commander of the Kirin army frowned and said, What exactly is he doing? Elder Qin muttered, It's a familiar scene, but what exactly is it? This old man can't remember. About a few hundred breaths passed. Qin Feiyang had evolved the fourth move of the ultimate tactics, Everyone thought that this was deliberately done by Qin Feiyang. But that was not the case. At this moment, Qin Feiyang had no idea what he was doing. It was as if he had lost consciousness and his body was moving naturally. Another few hundred breaths passed. Qin Feiyang was no longer evolving a single move. He continuously evolved the 4 moves of the ultimate tactics. He repeated it again and again. Woo woo. At this moment, the sound of the wind above the imperial palace changed. It was getting louder and louder. But the strange thing was that everyone was above the imperial palace and did not feel the wind. Is it haunted? Everyone was bewildered. Woo woo. The sound of the wind was getting more and more ear-piercing, as if ghosts were roaring in the void. Everyone could not help but feel apprehensive. A battle art without aura. The sound of the wind without wind. What a familiar scene. Where have I seen it before? Elder Qin whispered. The imperial preceptor was also muttering to himself. How is this possible? Suddenly, the imperial preceptor seemed to have thought of something as his body shook violently. His old face was full of disbelief. An Elder Qin and the commander of the Kirin army looked at the imperial preceptor. Yan Wei, as well as the people below and around, looked at the imperial preceptor one after another. The imperial preceptor was silent as he stared at Qin Feiyang. The murderous intent in his eyes was undisguised. Could it be? Looking at the imperial preceptor's expression, Elder Qin seemed to have thought of something. His gaze trembled slightly as he suddenly raised his head to look at Qin Feiyang. His old eyes were full of bewilderment. Why? Such a difficult thing, how could you do it? No. There can only be one monster in the great Qin Empire, and that is Zhuge Mingyang. You must die. The imperial preceptor muttered and suddenly soared into the sky, carrying a surging divine aura as he charged toward Qin Feiyang. Yan Wei's expression changed. What was going on? Why would the imperial preceptor suddenly have the intention to kill Qin Feiyang? What should I do? His mind was in a mess. Should he save Qin Feiyang? But if he did so, his identity would be exposed. One had to know. In order to gain the trust of the imperial preceptor, whether it was him or Qin Feiyang, they had both paid too much. But if he didn't save him, with Qin Feiyang's current state, he would definitely die. No. Even if my identity is exposed, I can't let the young lord fall into danger. Yan Wei gritted his teeth and was about to shout. Swoosh. But at this moment, a ray of divine light soared into the sky and flew toward the imperial preceptor. Yan Wei hurriedly looked over. It turned out to be Elder Qin. Don't even think about succeeding. Elder Qin's eyes were gloomy. That terrifying divine might was like a tide, covering the sky and covering the earth as it rushed toward the imperial preceptor. However, there was a trace of excitement on his face as he muttered, I didn't expect this brat to be able to enter the ethereal realm. Seeing Elder Qin make a move, Yan Wei also heaved a sigh of relief. The imperial preceptor waved his hand and his divine might roared out, colliding with Elder Qin's divine might as he shouted, Old thing, don't meddle in other people's business. You still dare to make a move here? Aren't you afraid of destroying the imperial palace and angering Emperor Hong? Elder Qin secretly sneered. Emperor Hong. The imperial preceptor's gaze trembled as he looked at the imperial palace below. Although he and Elder Qin did not use the power of the false gods, if the two divine might really collided, then not to mention the imperial palace, even the imperial city would be turned into ashes. Seeing that the two divine might were about to collide, the imperial preceptor hurriedly waved his hand, and the divine might immediately disappeared. Seeing this, Elder Qin also dispersed his divine might and stood in front of the imperial preceptor sneering. You never thought that Qin Feiyang would actually be able to enter the ethereal realm. Ethereal realm? What is this? Everyone was surprised. Yan Wei also had a face full of suspicion. Chapter 1367. Wrong. In your eyes, Qin Feiyang is a big problem. But in this old man's eyes, he is the hope of my great Qin, the future pillar. This old man will not allow anyone to hurt him. Old Qin secretly shouted. Hope. Pillar. The imperial preceptor muttered to himself, a sharp light flashing in his eyes, and secretly said, I didn't expect you to have already sided with Qin Feiyang. Humph. Old Qin snorted coldly and said, This old man has never sided with anyone, only standing on the side of justice. Ha ha. The imperial preceptor laughed loudly, as if he had heard the biggest joke in the world. Suddenly, his face changed, looked behind old Qin and bowed. Greetings, Emperor Hong. Emperor Hong. Old Qin's expression changed, and he hurriedly turned his head to look. Just as he turned his head, a hint of ridicule flashed in the imperial preceptor's eyes, and he rushed out from old Qin's side like lightning, heading straight for Qin Feiyang. Old Qin turned his head to look at the void and found that there was no one, and immediately realized that he had been tricked. Old man, you are a fake god at any rate, and you actually use such a despicable method. Old Qin was furious and hurriedly chased. But the battle between fake gods was a race against time. In an instant, many things could happen. The imperial preceptor had already arrived in front of Qin Feiyang, killing intent surging in his eyes. Don't, Old Qin roared. his hair standing on end. Go to hell. The Imperial Preceptor laughed sinisterly, raised his old hand, and like an eagle's claw, shattered the void, and grabbed towards Qin Feiyang's head. No! Yanwei also roared in his heart. However, at this moment, clang, accompanied by an earth-shaking loud sound, a black light rushed out from between Qin Feiyang's eyebrows. It was the ancient castle. It floated above Qin Feiyang's head, and wisps of divine might rolled out. Puff! The Imperial Preceptor was immediately sent flying, blood spurting out of his mouth, and his face was pale. So strong! Waves surged in his heart. At the same time, looking at this scene, old Qin was also shocked to the extreme. The onlookers below were even more dumbfounded. Was that Qin Feiyang's castle? It was actually so terrifying. Just a wisp of divine might was enough to severely injure the Imperial Advisor. That's great. With the protection of the ancient castle, not to mention the Imperial Advisor, even if Emperor Hong were to appear, he might not be able to harm young Lord. Yanwei mumbled. His heart that had been hanging in the air finally calmed down. Then he looked at Qin Feiyang. Such a great commotion had occurred, yet he seemed as if he didn't know anything. He still had his eyes closed as he ceaselessly repeated the 4 moves of the Void End technique. However, if one were to observe carefully, they would discover that the speed at which he was evolving was increasing bit by bit. Woo-woo! The sound of the wind became more and more deafening. It felt as if a level 12 typhoon was blowing in the sky above the Imperial Palace. The invisible force that permeated Qin Feiyang's surroundings also became more and more turbulent. After stabilizing his body, the State Preceptor coldly stared at Qin Feiyang and the castle from afar. This old man is unwilling. Suddenly, he wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth, and once again charged towards Qin Feiyang with monstrous anger. How can an ant shake a tree? Old man Qin sneered and turned to retreat to the side. The commander of the Kirin army flew to Old Man Qin's side and asked, Old Man Qin, what is the ethereal realm? Let's talk about it later. Old Man Qin waved his hand and looked at the Imperial Advisor without blinking. Puff! Before the Imperial Advisor could even get close, he was once again sent flying by the divine might emitted by the ancient castle. And this time, the injuries he suffered were even more serious than before. His body directly cracked, as if it was about to be torn apart. The divine blood was like rain, sprinkling down from the sky. With such a divine object in hand, who in the world can kill him? Old Man Qin whispered. Why is it like this? This old man refuses to accept this. The Imperial Advisor roared again and again, as if he had gone mad, and was about to charge towards Qin Feiyang again. Seeing this, Yanwei secretly sneered, quickly flew into the sky, pulled the Imperial Advisor, and sent a sound transmission. Lord, don't be rash. Let go. The Imperial Advisor shouted angrily. He was about to lose his mind and couldn't listen to anything. Lord! Yanwei secretly shouted and said, Qin Feiyang has the protection of the ancient castle, you can't kill him. If you continue to attack, the one who will be injured and embarrassed in the end will only be you. Moreover, have you forgotten? We still need his help with something. This Imperial Advisor is a false god. How can I not kill him? Get out of my way, if you dare to block my way again. Don't blame me for being merciless. The Imperial Advisor pushed Yanwei away. Pa. But the next moment, under the inconceivable gazes of countless people, Yanwei raised his hand and slapped the Imperial Advisor's old face. The Imperial Advisor was stunned. Old Man Qin and the commander of the Kirin army were also stunned. He actually dared to hit the Imperial Advisor. Was this person not afraid of death? Yanwei, on the other hand, was secretly chuckling. That slap was really satisfying. You dare to hit this Imperial Advisor. The Imperial Advisor was angry, his killing intent surging. Yanwei didn't panic at all, looked straight at the Imperial Advisor, and said, If this lowly one can wake you up, then even if you kill this lowly one now, this lowly one doesn't care. They were righteous and loyal. In other words, I'm doing it for your own good. If it was someone else, I wouldn't hit them. If Qin Feiyang heard these words, he would definitely give Yanwei a thumbs up. hitting the Imperial advisor and also showing his loyalty. It was killing two birds with one stone. The Imperial advisor glared at Yan Wei, suddenly waved his hand and slapped Yan Wei's face. Yan Wei didn't move, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. When we go back, I will slowly deal with you. The Imperial advisor snorted from his nose and looked up at Qin Feiyang, the coldness in his eyes difficult to dissipate. Actually, in his heart, he was very grateful to Yan Wei. If Yan Wei hadn't slapped him awake, he would still be doing something stupid. However, being slapped by his own subordinate in front of everyone, as the state preceptor, he couldn't bear it. Therefore, that was why he slapped Yan Wei, and said that he would slowly deal with Yan Wei when he went back. That way he wouldn't lose too much face. At this moment, the speed at which Qin Feiyang executed the four stances of the Ruins of End was so fast that no one could catch it. What exactly is he doing? Everyone was puzzled. Swash! All of a sudden, a purple-robed young man descended into the void not far away. How is that possible? The moment that person appeared and saw Qin Feiyang's abnormality, his face was filled with disbelief. Senior brother Zhuge, what is he doing? In the crowd, a few young men flew to the purple-robed young man and asked. These people were all dressed in the robes of the disciples of the combat god Hall, and had an imposing aura. However, the purple-robed young man turned a deaf ear to them, and stared at Qin Feiyang with a deadly gaze. This purple-robed young man was Zhuge Mingyang. Senior brother Zhuge? Seeing that Zhuge didn't say anything, the few of them looked at him suspiciously. There was a flash of anger in Zhuge Mingyang's eyes as he shouted at the few of them, "Get lost!" The few of them froze and retreated to the side resentfully. How is that possible? There are countless monsters in the world, but since ancient times, there are only a handful of people who can enter the ethereal realm. How is it possible for Qin Feiyang, that bastard, to do it? Is this a dream? Zhuge Mingyang looked at Qin Feiyang again, and muttered to himself. There was a hint of hostility between his brows. Time passed by quietly. At this moment, to the Imperial advisor and Zhuge Mingyang, every breath felt extremely long. Swoosh! Zhuge Mingyang clenched his fists and rushed to the front of the Imperial advisor. He said telepathically, "Old ancestor, you must kill him." "I've already tried. With the castle protecting him, I can't get close." The Imperial advisor thought to himself. Why? I, Zhuge Mingyang, am such a monstrous person, but I don't even have a single legendary item. What ability does this little bastard have to possess two divine items? Damned heavens! Why are you so biased? Zhuge Mingyang looked at the castle and roared in his heart. He was about to go crazy with hatred. At this moment, the hostility in his body reached an unprecedented level. Jealousy and hatred took over his entire body. Boom! Suddenly, a faint divine power spread out from Qin Feiyang's hands. Did it work? Old Qin murmured, and his old face was filled with excitement. The divine power didn't come from Qin Feiyang himself, but from the four moves of the Ruins of End incantation that he had evolved. It's divine power. Don't tell me he has become a god. Everyone was bewildered. However, Qin Feiyang seemed to be oblivious to all of this as his hands moved at lightning speed. At this moment, even those of the same cultivation realm as Qin Feiyang could not capture the trajectory of his hands. Rumble! The divine power went from weak to strong, and became increasingly terrifying. The four moves of the Ruins of End incantation had already been evolved to the extreme by Qin Feiyang. Heaven and earth began to tremble. In the starry sky, the hazy moonlight and resplendent starlight turned into ribbons that flooded the sky and converged towards Qin Feiyang. At this moment, the sky above the palace was as bright as day. Qin Feiyang stood in the moonlight and starlight. His skin was translucent and his long hair fluttered, emitting a mighty aura like a god that had descended to the world. Boom! About a few hundred breaths passed. The divine power of the four moves of the Ruins of End incantation had already soared to a terrifying extent and shrouded the entire place. An invisible force swept through the sky, causing countless people to tremble. One could even feel that terrifying aura thousands of miles away. All of a sudden, Qin Feiyang subconsciously raised his arm and pointed in the air. The first move of the Ruins of End incantation, landslide. The invisible force that roared around him suddenly turned into a torrent that blasted towards the imperial tutor, and the other two. The divine power was overwhelming. Provoking me? The imperial tutor was enraged. With a wave of his hand, the power of the false god rolled out and destroyed the invisible force as it pounced towards Qin Feiyang. The divine light of the ancient castle fell and formed a barrier. The power of the false god blasted on the barrier, but did not cause any waves and instantly disappeared. The collapse of the first move did not cause any injuries to Qin Feiyang either. Obviously, the ancient castle helped him to resolve the backlash of the collapse of the battle art. Immediately after, Qin Feiyang subconsciously pointed in the air again. The second move of the ruins of End Incantation. It also contained an extremely terrifying divine power. Don't go too far. Seeing Qin Feiyang provoking him again and again, the imperial tutor was furious and the power of the false god roared in the sky. But the final result was the same as before. He doesn't even know what he's doing now. It's just a subconscious action. Why are you so angry? Old man Qin sneered. Before he finished speaking, the third move of the ruins of End Incantation appeared, splitting the sky. The divine power was even more terrifying than the first and second moves. And the target was still the imperial tutor. Chapter 1368. However, what the imperial tutor did not expect was that the aura of the third move had already locked onto him. Bang! An invisible force blasted on his body. A destructive aura instantly spread out. The imperial tutor was fine. After all, he was a pseudo-god and Qin Feiyang was only a 4-star combat emperor. The difference was huge. However, Yan Wei and Zhuge Mingyang were not so lucky. Their cultivation was not as good as Qin Feiyang. Furthermore, they were not mentally prepared and their bodies were covered in blood. Fortunately, the imperial tutor reacted in time and erased the destructive aura. Otherwise, the two of them might lose their lives. After the event, Yan Wei smiled bitterly and did not say anything. However, Zhuge Mingyang was extremely furious. That sinister look in his eyes could not wait to cut Qin Feiyang into pieces. Bang! However, Qin Feiyang did not know this. He pointed his index finger in the air, and the fourth move of the ultimate appeared. It continued to roar towards the imperial tutor. The divine power that it emitted was almost twice as strong as the third move. The imperial tutor's face was gloomy. He waved his hand and the divine power surged and easily disintegrated the fourth move. Although he could easily disintegrate Qin Feiyang's ultimate art, Qin Feiyang's unconscious provocation made him very angry. Look at Qin Feiyang again. After performing the fourth move, he lowered his hands and the invisible force that filled the air gradually dissipated. Moreover, the sound of the wind, starlight and moonlight also gradually dissipated. It's finally over. Elder Qin heaved a sigh of relief. However, Qin Feiyang did not open his eyes for a long time. His expression was extremely serene as if he had fallen into a deep sleep. When everything returned to normal, Qin Feiyang finally opened his eyes. 2 bright rays of light burst out from his eyes. However, what followed was confusion. What's wrong with me? Qin Feiyang muttered. He looked at Elder Qin, the imperial tutor and the rest, and then at the crowd below. He asked suspiciously, "Why are there so many people?" Swoosh! Old man Qin rushed over to Qin Feiyang and asked, "You don't remember anything?" Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and said, "I only remember that when I walked out of the hall and looked at the moonlight, I had a feeling. But gradually, I seem to have entered a wonderful state. This is the ethereal realm." Old Qin said, "Ethereal realm?" Qin Feiyang was stunned and asked, "What's this?" Old man Qin glanced at the crowd below and said, "Let's go down first." All right. Qin Feiyang carried a belly full of doubts as he plunged down towards Bright Sky Palace. Old Qin and the commander of the Kirin army followed closely behind. When the three of them entered Bright Heaven Palace, Yan Wei retracted his gaze and asked softly, "My lord, what exactly is the ethereal realm?" The imperial advisor ignored him. He looked at Zhuge Mingyang and transmitted his voice to him. "Don't be discouraged. No matter what, You've entered the ethereal realm earlier than him. I did enter the ethereal realm earlier than him. But old ancestor, have you ever thought about how much older I am than him? Zhuge Mingyang mocked himself. When Qin Feiyang was just born, he had already entered the temple and was famous in the imperial capital. It could be said that he could be considered to have watched Qin Feiyang grow up. This was the essential difference. Bright Heaven Palace. Old Man Qin explained the situation of the ethereal realm to Qin Feiyang and the commander of the Kirin army in detail. It turned out that the ethereal realm was a kind of selfless state. Entering the ethereal realm, whether it was potential or comprehension, it would be greatly improved. But this improvement was only temporary. Once awakened from the ethereal realm, it would disappear. However, although it was short, it was enough to make a person undergo earth-shattering changes. This kind of change was the transformation of the battle arts. And it wasn't an ordinary transformation, but a transformation into a divine art. Just like before, the void returning art was originally just a perfect battle art, but in the end Qin Feiyang raised the void returning art to a divine art in the ethereal realm. In short, the ethereal realm was actually a kind of epiphany, comprehension of all things in the world. There was no shortcut to this kind of comprehension. Some people would never be able to enter the ethereal realm in their entire lives. And some people could only enter once in their entire lives. In short, the ethereal realm could only be encountered by chance and not sought. It completely depended on chance and luck. After listening to Old Man Qin's explanation, Qin Feiyang waved his hand and evolved the first move of the void returning art, landslide. Feeling that astonishing divine might, the excitement in his eyes could not be concealed. Unexpectedly, he could actually step into such a magical realm. Old Man Qin asked, "Do you know how the late emperor created the divine dragon art back then?" Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned and asked suspiciously, "Also enter the ethereal realm?" "Yes." Old Man Qin nodded and said, "However, don't be too proud, because someone entered the ethereal realm before you." Qin Feiyang was surprised and asked, "Who is it?" "You know him." Old Man Qin said. "I know him." Qin Feiyang frowned. A figure suddenly appeared in his mind and said, "It's Zhuge Mingyang." "That's right. It's just that when he entered the ethereal realm, he wasn't in the imperial city, so very few people know about it." Old Man Qin said. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a cold light and said, "You mean in order to transform a battle art into a divine art, only by entering the ethereal realm can it be done?" "Yes." Old Man Qin nodded and smiled. "However, you don't have to compete with Zhuge Mingyang. After all, you are much younger than him. Overall, you are still better than him." The commander of the Kirin army nodded in agreement. Because Zhuge Mingyang did not step into the ethereal realm when he was Qin Feiyang's age. "Why should I compete with him?" Qin Feiyang smiled faintly, waved his hand, and the first move of the ruins returning art, landslide, instantly collapsed. Swish! At this moment, two figures descended outside the main hall. Qin Feiyang looked up, and his eyes flashed. It was Yan Wei and the Imperial Preceptor. At the same time, Old Man Qin and the commander of the Kirin army also looked at the Imperial Preceptor, their eyes flashing coldly. Now, Old Man Qin and the commander of the Kirin army had completely fallen out with the Imperial Preceptor. Of course, the Imperial Preceptor did not have a good impression of Old Man Qin and the commander. In short, both sides were unhappy with each other. "Congratulations, congratulations." Yan Wei followed behind the Imperial Preceptor, and as he entered the main hall, he secretly smiled. Obviously, he had already heard about the ethereal realm from the Imperial Preceptor. Qin Feiyang secretly smiled and asked in confusion, "What's with the injuries on your body?" Yan Wei was stunned and said with a wry smile, "Isn't it your masterpiece?" "Me?" Qin Feiyang was stunned. The Imperial Preceptor is right. Those who enter the ethereal realm don't know what to do. Yan Wei helplessly smiled and briefly explained the situation at that time. After all, at this time it was not suitable to talk for too long. Of course, although it was just a few words, Yan Wei also explained the whole thing very clearly. This Qin Feiyang was stunned and secretly smiled. Sorry. It's nothing. But you have to thank old man Qin for this. Yan Wei secretly said. I know. Qin Feiyang said. During the conversation, the Imperial Preceptor came to Qin Feiyang and the other two, and stopped to look at old man Qin. Old man Qin also looked at him. Both of their gazes were overbearing, and their gazes collided in the void, creating wisps of invisible sparks. The atmosphere became dignified all of a sudden. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed, and he turned to look at old man Qin and said, I am very grateful for your help, but now, I have some private matters to discuss with the Imperial Preceptor. Please leave first. Private matters? Old man Qin raised his eyebrows. He was worried that Qin Feiyang and the Imperial Preceptor had some kind of deal. Don't worry. I will never wallow in the mire with the Imperial Preceptor. Qin Feiyang secretly said. Old man Qin looked at him deeply, opened a portal, and said to the commander of the Kirin army, Let's go. Immediately, the two turned and walked toward the portal. Commander. The Imperial Preceptor suddenly turned his eyes and fell on the commander of the Kirin army. The commander of the Kirin army stiffened and asked without turning his head, What's the matter? The Imperial Preceptor needs to remind you that you are the commander of the Kirin army, and your duty is to guard the safety of the Imperial Palace, not to follow an idle person all day and do nothing. The Imperial Preceptor said. The commander of the Kirin army felt a chill in his heart. This old man really didn't give up the idea of killing him. Now, he followed old man Qin, and the Imperial Preceptor couldn't find a chance, so the Imperial Preceptor wanted to use this method to make him return to the Imperial Palace. Once he returned to the Imperial Palace, it would be like a sheep in a tiger's mouth, and there would be no escape. What a vicious heart! He muttered in his heart, and his face was full of disgust. I know what I am doing. Don't worry about the Imperial Preceptor. It's good that you know what you are doing, or the Imperial Preceptor will have to consider whether to change the commander of the Kirin army. The Imperial Preceptor said expressionlessly. The commander of the Kirin army clenched his hands. This was forcing him to return to the Imperial Palace. Old man Qin turned to look at the Imperial Preceptor and said, The commander of the Kirin army was personally appointed by His Majesty. Without His Majesty's sacred order, are you qualified to replace him? The Imperial Preceptor said lightly. He was personally appointed by His Majesty, but now I am in charge of the state affairs. Old man Qin said. Not in charge but in charge. Although there is only one word difference, the meaning is completely different. The Imperial Preceptor's eyes flashed a touch of sharp light, and he nodded. Yes, I admit that I am not qualified to be in charge of the state affairs, but what if the little prince inherits the throne? His face was full of ridicule. The implication was that after the little prince inherits the throne, he only needed to say a word, and the little prince would order to remove him from the position of the commander of the Kirin army. What? The little prince hasn't inherited the throne yet, and you are already planning to control him behind the scenes in the future? Old man Qin sneered. Old man, be careful of trouble from the mouth. The Imperial Preceptor's face darkened. The little prince was still young and didn't have the ability to deal with the state affairs. Then what would happen after he inherits the throne? Naturally, he, the Imperial Preceptor, would be in charge. When the time came, whatever he said, the little prince would naturally have to do. But these were only his inner thoughts. He certainly didn't dare to show them. Who would have thought that old man Qin would directly expose his ambition in front of him at this moment, which made him angry out of shame. Chapter 1369. Disaster comes from the mouth? Old Qin snorted disdainfully, then looked at the commander of the Kirin army, and said indifferently, Don't talk nonsense with those shameless people, let's go. The commander of the Kirin army nodded. Then, the two of them entered the portal without looking back. Looking at the backs of the two, the Imperial tutor's killing intent rose. When the portal dissipated, Qin Feiyang laughed mockingly, then walked to the front of the throne, sat down on it and said indifferently, Lord Imperial Tutor usually doesn't come to the Three Treasures Palace for no reason. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't beat around the bush. The imperial tutor raised his head to look at Qin Feiyang and said, I heard that you went to see Emperor Hong? Qin Feiyang said, based on state preceptor's ability, you should have known long ago, right? Why bother asking? Don't you feel bored? A hint of anger flashed through the imperial tutor's eyes. Without any more nonsense, he took out a jade box from his bosom and said to Yan Wei, send it to him. Yan Wei nodded, held the jade box with both hands, and walked in front of Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang grabbed the jade box and opened the lid. Inside was the imperial jade seal. He curiously grabbed it in his hand, carefully examining it from top to bottom. Not to mention, from the outside, this imperial jade seal and the real imperial jade seal were almost the same. After looking at it, Qin Feiyang put the imperial jade seal into the jade box, and then looked down at the imperial tutor condescendingly, and said, you really have guts, even daring to forge the imperial jade seal. The imperial tutor laughed and said, you can tell the real from the fake at a glance, as expected of His Majesty's most beloved prince. Are you deliberately provoking me? Qin Feiyang's eyes turned cold. These words are serious. Who in the world doesn't know what kind of person you, Qin Feiyang, are? Even if this imperial tutor has the guts, he wouldn't dare to provoke you. The imperial tutor laughed sarcastically. That's true. Qin Feiyang was not ashamed. Instead, he was proud. The imperial preceptor's face twitched. What a shameless bastard. He said, cut the crap. Help me turn this imperial jade seal into a real one. Qin Feiyang smiled. When he heard that the state preceptor wanted to make a replica of the imperial jade seal, he had already expected this result. After coming out of the ancient castle, he was waiting for the imperial tutor to find him. However, if he agreed to the state preceptor's request so easily, it would show that he had no personality. What can I do when even you, the state preceptor, can't do? Qin Feiyang said with a smile. That's boring. This old man doesn't believe that you don't know that you are the only one in this world who can create the true imperial jade seal. The imperial advisor said. Qin Feiyang smiled but said nothing. The state preceptor walked to a chair at the side and sat down. He didn't urge Qin Feiyang and waited quietly. Based on the relationship between you and me, to be honest, I really can't find any reason to help you. What's more, when I entered the ethereal realm, you still wanted to kill me, Qin Feiyang said in a playful tone. In this world, there are only eternal benefits and no eternal enemies. As far as this old man knows, you told Emperor Hong that you would help the little prince ascend to the throne. This old man is also helping the little prince by doing this. So now, we can actually be considered partners. As for attacking you before, you can't blame this old man because if it were any other opponent, they would have done the same. The state preceptor said indifferently. Qin Feiyang said, to be able to be regarded as an opponent by your state preceptor, I am truly honored. However, I still don't want to help. Why? Could it be that what you said to Emperor Hong was all fake? The state preceptor frowned. How would I dare to deceive Emperor Hong? But there are many ways to help the little prince. Why should I help you forge the imperial jade seal? Qin Feiyang asked back. It's very simple. With the imperial jade seal, the little prince's ascension to the throne is only justified. The state preceptor said. Lord State Preceptor, we are all sensible people. Why do you have to put on an act? You are so scheming to help the little prince, isn't it for your own ambition? And I, as the little prince's brother, do you think I will help you harm him? Qin Feiyang sneered. Why does it sound so funny coming from your mouth? If you really care about these brotherly feelings, would you have cruelly killed the first prince and the others? The state preceptor retorted. Qin Feiyang grinned and said, after killing the first prince, isn't your Zhuge family the one who feels the most heartache? What do you mean? The state preceptor suddenly stood up. Nothing, I'm just saying, don't be so nervous. Qin Feiyang's face was full of ridicule. The state preceptor's eyes flickered. Why would this boy say such words? The one who felt heartache for the first prince was their Zhuge family. Could it be that this boy had already noticed something? Qin Feiyang changed the topic and said with a smile. Actually, it's not difficult for me to help you. The state preceptor looked at him suspiciously. Qin Feiyang said, use a divine art in exchange. You. The state preceptor was furious. Don't be in a hurry to get angry. This world has always been like this. Only when there is effort, there will be gain. Although now, you will lose a divine art, but you can use this to achieve your ambition. If you really want to calculate, Lord State Preceptor, you will only gain and not lose. Qin Feiyang said with a smile. The State Preceptor fell silent. If he could use a divine art in exchange for the great Qin's empire, of course it was worth it. However, he was afraid that Qin Feiyang would play tricks with him and end up in a situation where he would suffer a double loss. Go back and think about it carefully. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and directly ordered him to leave. The state preceptor gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, there's no need to think about it. This old man will agree to you now. However, I don't have a divine art, but I have a divine artifact. Moreover, you have to promise to help this old man and help the little prince ascend to the throne. As expected of the state preceptor, you are decisive and direct. So what if it's a divine artifact? Give it to me. Qin Feiyang's face was full of admiration, and he reached out with a smile. The state preceptor took a deep breath and with a thought. A divine light swept out from his sea of qi and flew in front of Qin Feiyang. It was a book. However, it was different from ordinary books. This book was made of an unknown divine metal, and it was suffused with a jet-black light. A shocking murderous aura could be felt from afar. On the cover of the book, there were 3 bold words written on it. 10,000 Beasts Diagram. These 3 words seemed to be condensed from divine power. Every stroke carried an imposing aura that oppressed the soul. 10,000 Beasts Diagram, Qin Feiyang frowned. Although this iron book did have the aura of a divine artifact, he still couldn't help but wonder if it was really a divine artifact. What's wrong? You suspect that it's fake? Seeing Qin Feiyang not speaking for a long time, the state preceptor frowned and said. Qin Feiyang nodded and said, yes, you can only blame yourself for being too cunning. I have to guard against it. Or is it this old man's fault? The state preceptor suddenly couldn't help but be angry and said, now this old man will erase the blood contract and let you drip blood to recognize it as your master to verify its authenticity. After saying that, with a thought, the blood contract immediately dissipated. Qin Feiyang didn't hesitate and immediately dripped blood to recognize it as his master. After recognizing it as his master, a huge amount of information immediately poured into Qin Feiyang's mind. Qin Feiyang looked carefully. In the end, a trace of surprise climbed up on his face. This 10,000 Beasts diagram was really a divine artifact. There were a total of 99 pages. Each page was made of divine iron, and as thin as a cicada's wing. And according to the information, these 99 pages, each page could summon a beast spirit to help the master fight. In other words, this 10,000 Beasts diagram could summon 99 beast spirits to fight for him. The beast spirits on each page were different. Moreover, these 99 beast spirits were all divine beast spirits. For example, Divine Dragon, Fire Phoenix, Qilin, Torch Dragon, Hell God Hound, and so on. The most important thing was that these beast spirits were immortal and indestructible. If they were scattered by someone, they could be summoned again the next day, unless the 10,000 Beasts diagram was destroyed. However, soon, the joy in Qin Feiyang's heart was replaced by vigilance. He knew the state preceptor too well. With the state preceptor's character, it was impossible for him to simply give him a divine artifact. The state preceptor said impatiently, this old man has already given you the divine artifact. Shouldn't you fulfill your promise now? I can't run away. Why are you in such a hurry? Qin Feiyang smiled and was about to open the cover and open the first page. However, he was surprised to find that he couldn't open the cover. And he frowned slightly and tried again, but he still couldn't open it. Immediately, Qin Feiyang looked up at the state preceptor and asked, what's going on? The state preceptor said, the 10,000 Beasts diagram can only be opened when you break through to the real war god. There's such a thing? Qin Feiyang was shocked. What else do you think? If I could flip it open, I would have flipped it open when I fought with Renduxing back then. The state preceptor snorted coldly. I was wondering why you haven't used the 10,000 beasts diagram before. It turns out that you can't open it. Qin Feiyang suddenly said. You've gotten a big bargain. According to this old man's estimation, this 10,000 beasts diagram is at least on the same level as Chang Shui and the castle. The state preceptor said. On the same level as Chang Shui? Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled noncommittally. Although he didn't know what level Chang Shui and the castle were, but he was sure that this so-called 10,000 beasts diagram was definitely not comparable to Chang Shui and the castle. However, it needed to wait until the war god to open it. It seemed that this 10,000 beasts diagram was not a low-level artifact. Okay, then I'll accept it. Qin Feiyang chuckled, and with a thought, the 10,000 beasts diagram entered the Qi Sea and floated next to Chang Shui. Then, he grabbed the Imperial Jade Seal again and looked at it left and right. There was a glimmer of light in the depths of his eyes. Wait a minute. Qin Feiyang looked up at the state preceptor and said, then took the jade box and the Imperial Jade Seal and entered the castle. Lu Zhen got up and walked to Qin Feiyang's side. Looking at the Imperial Jade Seal in his hand, his pupil shrank slightly and said, sure enough, it can be passed off as genuine. What's fake will never be real. Qin Feiyang raised the corner of his mouth, took out Chang Shui and carefully scratched the bottom of the Imperial Jade Seal. Immediately, a gap appeared. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.